Chapter 477. Gavin Rad was a qualified guard. Most of the time, he was a tactful fellow. He had seen too many affairs between nobles. In fact, he had done quite a few of them. It was just that after Stormwind City had fallen, he had put more effort into battle and military affairs. Just now, when the dragon had tried to plow the ground, even though Gavin Rad was invincible, he had been sent flying by the huge impact. He was not hurt, but he had been thrown into a shallow swamp. He was in heavy armor and was in trouble. He could not run over, so he could only shout nervously. Who knew that Duque would have such romantic thoughts with his rumored sister-in-law in a situation like this? This rough man's words had messed up the atmosphere between Duque and Sasha. That was not enough. And then there was the next sentence. "Boss, are you dead yet? If you're not, make a sound." Duque did not make a sound. Instead, he used an arcane spell to write the word in the air. Gavin Rad, the single dog, was dumbfounded. Luo Ning was fine, but he was a little unlucky when he activated Ice Barrier. His whole body was sent flying by the dragon, and he landed in a swamp far away. After the Ice Barrier was deactivated, he fell into the mud like a tree. The swamp was not as deep as his calf. He would not drown, but he was in a sorry state. Ronin's face and red hair were covered in mud. To put it nicely, it looked like he had played with mud and wrestled. To put it bluntly, it felt like he had crawled out of a pit of shit. The only one who was not in a sorry state was Marion. Her blink was very far, and she had crossed dozens of meters. So, after she deactivated Ice Barrier, the first thing she did was to finish off the dragon. A 40-meter-long super arcane energy blade extended from Marion's slender hand, and it beheaded the dragon who was coughing up blood and struggling on the ground to finish off Duque and the others. Everything was silent. "Duque, can you get up first? You're so heavy." Not daring to look at Duque, Sasha, who was under him, tilted her face slightly. "Oh, I'm sorry." Her current posture was indeed unsightly. Even the thick-skinned Duque blushed. How should it be said, the three Windstalker sisters were too similar. For a moment, Duque almost thought that the person in front of him was his own Aurelia, and he wanted to press on and get intimate with her. Fortunately, the hair color of the three sisters was quite different. Especially Windsor's bright silver. That was close. That was close. He almost became a beast. Duque thought to himself that he was lucky. Then he stood up in a gentlemanly manner, bent down and extended his hand. Sasha was slightly stunned, but she still placed her soft and slender hand on Duque's palm. On the other side, Gavin Rad had just pulled the miserable Ronin out of the swamp. The swamp might not be deep, but the suction wasn't something an ordinary person could easily break free from. Then, the two burly men covered in mud saw Duque pull Sasha out of the pit gracefully. Duque even carefully patted off the snow on Sasha's shoulder armor. "Hey, can someone tell me why when I pull you up, what we're patting off is mud that smells like that thing? Why are they patting off snow?" Gavin Rad muttered unhappily. That's right. The style was completely different. One side was very beautiful, and it was completely in line with all the elements that were praised by bards in night novels. The other side was very good, but the style was terrible. Ronin was completely unmoved. Instead, he held his head with both hands in distress. "I only saw that I once again helplessly watched my teammate in danger of death. The one who risked his life to save his teammate was the great Duke Marcus, not me." Gavin Rad was originally very angry at the troublemaker, Ronin. But after knowing that Ronin had caused the death of his teammate and the pain and self-blame that he couldn't hide, Gavin Rad suddenly felt pity for the rough red-haired mage. Marion was very unhappy. She was clearly the main damage dealer. Why did the main character become Duque? No, that wasn't important. What was important was why Duque actually had something going on with his sister-in-law. That was what Marion was most unhappy about. Marion put her hands on her hips. "Hey, whatever you want to say, wait a bit. I insist that we move immediately. Based on the speed of those lizards, more will arrive in 10 minutes at most." How far could they go in 10 minutes? The horses of the five were all startled. Ronin's horse was swallowed in one bite, and the other horses were nowhere to be seen. The only one that could be seen was Gavinrad's horse. Perhaps the horses of paladins were especially easily inspired by the holy light and were especially courageous. Anyway, Gavinrad's heavy war horses didn't run. They just stayed at the edge of the swamp and watched Gavinrad. However, when Gavinrad came out of the swamp and passionately hugged the horse's head, the horse seemed to have smelled Gavinrad's unpleasant odor. It actually snorted, turned around, and galloped 10 meters away before turning back to look at Gavinrad. It was clearly saying, "Don't touch me if you don't wash yourself clean." Oh my God! I'm so handsome, but my horse is actually looking down on me today. Gavinrad looked like he had nothing left to live for. Duke glanced at the cloudy sky in the distance, then looked at the system notification and said, "It's going to rain. We won't be able to walk far in 10 minutes. If we move recklessly, we'll be digging our own graves. Let's just stay here." Stay here? Marion's eyes widened in disbelief. Of course, we'll disguise ourselves. At this moment, Marion, Gavinrad, Sasha, and Ronan were all stunned. What kind of disguise could they do in 10 minutes? The 100-meter-long ground was still burning. The huge traces of the Crimson Dragon's crash could be seen from far away. Not to mention the eye-catching corpse of the Crimson Dragon that was as large as a small mountain. Marion was a little flustered. She subconsciously raised her head and tilted her chin. "I'd like to know how a mere morning star like you can do something that even a radiant moon wizard like me can't do." Radiant moons and morning stars were essentially star wizards, and were in the category of perpetual motion machines. However, they could not hide the fact that the moon was closer to the ground than the stars. Simply put, a radiant moon's mana output was at least 100 times higher than a morning star wizard's. Sasha was about to say something, but Duque waved his hand to stop her. Duque didn't seem angry at all. "In terms of strength, I obviously can't compare to you. However, in terms of some minor magic techniques, you can't compare to me." With that, Duque snapped his fingers, and everyone immediately discovered that the surrounding scenery had changed. Chapter 478. A huge canopy started to cover everyone's heads. It extended in a small curve from the top of their heads in all directions. The border was like a piece of paper that had been set on fire. A burning mark that kept moving downwards appeared in everyone's field of vision. When it felt very realistic, but still a little distorted, everyone came to a realization. No, it should be said that Gavinrad was the only one watching the show. Everyone, including Sasha, suddenly realized that the scene they saw from the canopy had become a little illusory and hazy. Illusion? But this big? An area of effect spell that spanned hundreds of meters left everyone speechless. The two mages and the ranger all used their own abilities to charge out of the area covered by the illusion. Gavinrad saw this and immediately jumped onto his horse, running out to watch the show. When they charged out and looked back, everyone's mouths, which had already been slightly open from shock, immediately widened. What did they just see? The huge deep mark that the giant dragon had made when it fell was gone. What they saw was just an ordinary muddy road in the swamp. The dragon corpses that had been piled up like a small hill had now become a small hill. As if the heavens were helping Duque, rain started to fall from the sky. It seemed that the thick burnt smell and the unique fishy smell of dragon blood would be diluted in a while. Seeing this, Gavinrad breathed a sigh of relief. But unexpectedly, the two pharaohs' expressions became even more nervous. "Not good," Ronan cried out in shock. Only the spellcasters themselves knew the limitations of illusions. The bigger and more complicated the scene created by the illusion, the more it tested the spellcaster's skill. If it was said that when the rain poured down, there wouldn't be any water left in the area of the illusion. As long as the observer wasn't an idiot, they would definitely be seen through. Ronan cried out in shock. Marion also clenched her fists nervously. Once again, they couldn't believe their eyes. What was that? The rain poured down from the sky, and the dense and long lines of rain fell to the ground. It didn't have the unstable feeling of being in a trance like a low-level illusion. It did not have the rigid intermediate illusions, which did not care if it was raining or scattering sand. Everything inside the illusions would be absorbed without making a sound. They only saw that after the rain line fell into the field of illusion, it looked like the rain line was still falling naturally from the outside. When it fell to the ground, it created small splashes, and when it fell into the puddles of the swamp, it created small ripples. Furthermore, they weren't rigid and identical water ripples. They were ripples of different sizes that would affect each other. The four of them were dumbfounded. Still in disbelief, Gavin Rad stood at the boundary of the illusion with his hands on his hips, looking left and right. Impressively, it was verified that Duque had used illusions to simulate almost everything. Most of the things inside and outside were the same, except for the traces of fire and shoveling, as well as the huge dragon corpse. Right at this moment, an urgent dragon roar came from the horizon. It wasn't a threat, nor was it a demonstration. It was more like a message. "Come in quickly." Duque waved his hand, and the four of them ran back into the field of illusion. Just in case, they found a small hill under the shade of a tree and hid as much as possible. Looking up, they saw several black dots rapidly enlarging on the horizon. In a few breaths, they could vaguely see these big red guys that had pushed away the dark clouds. Naturally, they were the dragon riders of the Dragon Maw tribe. They rode on their giant dragons and circled above Duque's head for several kilometers. They seemed to be shouting something, but they were too far away to hear clearly. Sasha's long elven ears twitched. Relying on the strength given to her by the wind, she whispered everything she heard. Sasha was actually a language genius. She didn't understand the dragon language, nor did she understand the orc language, but she could perfectly repeat the dragon's whispers and the orc's shouts. Duque knew the orc language, and after translating it, it was, "Didn't that guy Orlando's dragon shout that there's a strong enemy here? Why can't I see anyone or the dragon? Don't tell me he ran away?" Another orc rider replied. "Probably. There are no signs of battle around. Once the big guys we're riding start fighting, they can be seen from miles away." That was how the orcs discussed. Marion's translation of the dragon language was a different version. "Be careful, Graal's signal is that he can't handle it. Graz is already the strongest of the third generation of dragons. He might have already been killed. Is there really such a terrifying enemy? Don't underestimate the humans and high elves. Even though most of them are weak, the strongest among them has the ability to threaten Her Majesty's life." The giant dragon circled a few times in the sky, but it didn't find anything. Most of the red dragons flew away first. Under the orc's orders, it reluctantly lowered its altitude and flew over the nearby swamp at a height of about 100 meters. Most dragons didn't care about things that weren't their interests. Obviously, this female red dragon wasn't one of them. On the ground, a hill attracted her attention. Even though she was being controlled, she still tried to use all sorts of things to distract her attention and anger, such as admiring the beautiful mountains and rivers. Unknowingly, she clearly remembered the terrain of the entire wetland. She was absolutely sure that there wasn't a hill here 2 days ago. She began to get closer. A dragon's nose was more sensitive than most dogs. She didn't feel it when she was soaring high in the sky, but when she arrived, she smelled the faint scent of blood and burnt soil. However, as far as he could see, there was no sign of battle at all. An instinctive sense of danger made her secretly adjust her flight path and deviate from the predetermined course. If the other party really killed Graal, who was known as the strongest of the third-generation dragons, in such a short time, then she would only be sending herself to her death if she bumped into him. This female dragon's cautiousness saved her life. That's right, she was originally flying straight towards the corpse of the already dead Graal. She stealthily deviated and ended up brushing past the edge of Duque's illusory domain. Most red dragons preferred melee combat, but there were also geniuses like Krasus. This little female dragon noticed something was wrong the moment she brushed past the illusory domain. She turned her yellow eyes slightly and saw through the illusory domain. She was shocked to see Graal's corpse and a human mage smiling at her under the shade of a tree. No, there wasn't just one mage. She saw at least 3 mages, a paladin and a ranger. Chapter 479. In that instant, the little female dragon had 2 choices. One was to become the beastman's loyal dog and point out the location of Duque and the others. She could imagine that she would definitely be attacked by Duque and the others. The most likely outcome was that she would die. This was also a matter of status. If Duque and the others panicked, or if Duque opened a portal early to escape, the little female dragon would not be so afraid. However, the best fighter among her peers was already lying on the ground. Blood was still flowing from his severed neck. It was not a scene of blood splattering dozens of feet, but it was still frightening enough. What kind of person was a mage who could easily kill a 1,000-year-old dragon? The little female dragon did not dare to imagine. Looking at Duke's strange face and the confident smile on Duke's face, Luo Ruashi felt a chill run down her spine. The little female dragon naturally took it as a warning, don't talk too much. Otherwise, you will end up like him. So, the little female dragon did not hesitate to choose the second option. Pretending to be deaf and mute. After all, if the queen was rescued, she might still have to mix with the humans and elves in the future. The Tirisful Council had worked together with the 4 major dragon races for thousands of years. The little female dragon whispered in dragon language, "I didn't see anything." The little female dragon was not sure if he had heard her. Unexpectedly, in the next second, the young human used arcane energy to produce a line of words. It was standard dragon language, and on it was the name of the leader of the Red Dragon Army, Alexstrasza. The little female dragon said, "Understood." "Mount, what are you shouting for?" The beast man on the dragon's back asked rudely. "Nothing, my throat is itchy," the little female dragon replied helplessly in her unpracticed beastman language. To the people below, flying at high speed was just a matter of a flash. If dragons could sweat, the little female dragon would definitely be drenched as if she had just been fished out of water. The dragon shadow disappeared into the distance. The group of 5 finally sighed in relief. The danger had passed. How to clean up the mess was now on the agenda. Ronan rubbed the back of his head, as if he had been holding back a breath and suddenly exploded. "Everyone, sorry, I messed up again." "Who said you messed up?" Duque said with a straight face. "I thought you had a bright future and could attract enemies, so I taught you how to use your magic talent. I'm the one who should feel sorry for letting you become bait without knowing it." "Is this true?" Luo Ning froze. If he hadn't made a move against the first few beastmen, then Gavin Rad alone would have been enough to slaughter them all. Duque pursed his lips and turned to Marion. "Did you hear that dragon's dragon language?" She didn't know why Duque wanted to protect Ronan's pride, but since Duque was the boss of the team, Marion was happy to do him a favor. "Congratulations, Duque. You've successfully connected with the Red Dragon Army." After saying that, Marion translated a little of the little female dragon's dragon language. The other 3 once again opened their mouths wide in shock. Is that even possible? Red dragons that like to fight are few and far between, after all. Killing this guy will be getting rid of a scourge. In terms of results, our fight was perfect. No one was hurt and they were on the line. Also, Duque chanted a short incantation and a giant portal opened up. In front of the 4 of them, a semi-ethereal specter mage walked out of the blue oval portal with a giant magic puppet. "Master, what are your orders?" Karthika asked. He was supposed to be an influential figure in this world, but because of a ridiculous twist of fate, he died before he could even make a name for himself. Duque pointed at the giant dragon corpse. "Same old rules." Karthika's mouth twitched. "Master Duque, I must remind you that the Red Dragon Army is fundamentally kind." Duque said righteously, "Right now our factions are at war, and we're on our way to save Alexstrasza. If the Red Dragon Queen is that petty, I'll make sure she doesn't have a good time." "All right, you're the master. Whatever you say." Karthika waved his hand, and more arcane puppets ran out of the portal. Under his command, they skillfully dissected the dragon corpse. The 3rd-generation Red Dragon Grizzla, who had a bright future ahead of him and had a high chance of becoming an ancient dragon, was dissected and transported away in front of everyone. The entire process took less than 20 minutes. It was clear that Karthika's skinning was at the master level. "Now I believe that you've killed more than 300 red dragons in Alterac," Marion said, giggling. Although many military reports were accompanied by magical images, the arrogant elves always felt that the humans were lying about the military reports and exaggerating their achievements. Otherwise, why would 50,000 beastmen be able to beat the high elves like dogs, while the 20 to 30,000 humans were able to kill the beastmen? Didn't this mean that the high elves were inferior to the humans? The elves couldn't accept this truth from the bottom of their hearts. Karthika shrugged. I didn't want to. After dissecting a few hundred red dragons, I can dissect one with my eyes closed. What was Duque doing at this moment? He sighed and laughed inwardly. Of the two archmages in Azeroth, Karthika was a tragedy. Unless he joined the Lich King in the future, he would be like this for the rest of his life. Who knew if Luo Ning would be able to rise to the level he had in history in this life? However, this wasn't something that Duque had to worry about. After the dozens of arcane puppets, which had been created using the Karazhan Curator as a blueprint, cleaned up the scene, Karthika retreated with his subordinates. All right, what do we do now? Gavin Rad looked at the supplies that had been brought back from Karazhan and was worried that there weren't enough horses to transport them. This was because the food stored in a mage's storage bag would sometimes go bad. Duque suddenly laughed. He flipped his hand and pointed behind him with his thumb. Why don't we ask our friends over there? No one knew what Duque was doing. In grim battle, Queen Alexstrasza, who had transformed into her human form and had been lying on the cold floor, twitching in pain, suddenly opened her eyes. The main reason why the Red Dragon army was willing to be enslaved by the Beastmen was because the entire race was connected on a spiritual level. The Queen's will was absolute. Similarly, the lower Red Dragons also acted as the support for the Queen's power. On this day, Alexstrasza once again felt the loss of the Red Dragon army. For the young dragons that only had animal instincts and the intelligence of a 5- or 6-year-old human child, a loss was a loss. Strictly speaking, as long as they didn't have complete self-awareness, they couldn't be considered a part of the Red Dragon army. Chapter 480. It was different this time. Among the third-generation Red Dragons, Griffin was one of the more valued ones. Although he was violent and had a serious tendency to destroy, as a combat dragon, all these could only be regarded as advantages. Griffin was killed almost instantly. The Red Dragon Queen did not sense the specific situation, but she instinctively believed that it must be a strong one. But the image of the soul sent by a little female dragon later made Alexstrasza not know whether to laugh or cry. Duke Marcus. The moment she saw the image, Alexstrasza recognized Duque. To be honest, Alexstrasza had never taken the strong humans seriously. There were only a few humans who could really catch her eye. Back then, even when it came to Breaking Dawn mages and monarchs like Anastrian and Antonidas, this queen only said, "Oh," and did not continue. Even in the long tens of thousands of years, there were not many great people who could be remembered by her. The only one she remembered was Duque, and it was Duque who was only an earth mage at that time. There was no other reason than that the siege of Karazhan had left a deep impression on her. The magic barrage that was like a torrential rain, the magic baptism that seemed to be able to cause the entire Red Dragon army to suffer heavy casualties, was actually forcibly turned into unprecedented fireworks by that little Duque. Alexstrasza felt as if her entire race had been toyed with by Duke. She couldn't even hit the target with a small spell that didn't even count as an itch, but would always hit the target. Later on, she had to secretly be grateful to this cunning young man, and almost gave him a certificate of merit. Now he was here again, as a possible savior. Speaking of which, being controlled this time was the dragons shooting themselves in the foot. Because of Nisario's betrayal, the dragons suffered heavy casualties, and even caused the blue dragons to almost go extinct. In the end, the corrupted soul of the dragon was taken back, and the dragons cast a spell on this divine artifact that had become the soul of the demon, making it impossible for any dragon to use this divine artifact. But the arrogant dragons forgot about the other races, which led to today's humiliation. If it was in the past, she wouldn't have cared if the Alliance sent a kid to save her. Unfortunately, after being controlled by the devil's soul and enslaved by the orcs, the dignity of the dragons had been trampled on. Being chained up, being wantonly beaten, and being subjected to pain on the soul level. Moreover, the orc warlock Necros was already using her as a bargaining chip to force the second-generation dragons to mate and produce more young dragons for the tribe. If Alexstrasza hadn't discovered that as long as she maintained her human form, the orcs wouldn't force her to mate with other dragons, the outcome might have been even worse. In fact, Alexstrasza couldn't hold on much longer. She could feel herself weakening on a spiritual level. If she completely succumbed or weakened, then she would not be able to maintain the protective magic on her dragon egg to protect her child that might be born. The Azeroth dragon was a little strange. The eggs of the female dragon were not the real offspring. Just like a human female's egg, not every egg would become a child, but an egg would be released every month. The red dragon was similar. Female dragons would ovulate at relatively regular intervals, dragon eggs. However, these dragon eggs could only hatch and become real dragons after the male dragon imbued them with a special spiritual inheritance and power. Of course, female dragons could also use their power to catalyze the eggs to hatch young dragons, but these young dragons were usually just trash. The power of the parents determined the upper limit of the offspring's power. If a dragon wanted to give birth to a strong offspring, it was best to find a dragon of a similar level as a partner. Alexstrasza knew very well that countless ambitious people were eyeing her precious dragon eggs. The Red Dragon Queen couldn't help but mutter in her heart, "Duque, come and save me. If you can save me before my babies are destroyed, then I'll be grateful to you for the rest of my life. Otherwise, if it's too late, don't blame me for taking it out on you. It seems like I can't beg a little human to be so perfect. I'm so conflicted. On the one hand, she had to place her hopes on Duque and hope that he would come quickly. On the other hand, she felt that it was too much to place her hopes on a human who wasn't very powerful. Alexstrasza, who was deep in the whirlpool of despair, was actually a little confused at this moment. Duque could not guess the thoughts of the once high and mighty Red Dragon Queen. At this moment, Duque had met an unexpected ally. In the original time and space, when the Alliance mobilized to save the Red Dragon Queen, the main force of the Horde had already been defeated, leaving only the scattered tribes and clans resisting stubbornly. Therefore, in the entire wetland area, besides the orc dragon riders of the Dragonmaw clan, there were also a large number of Alliance armed forces: the Griffin Knights of the Wildhammer dwarves from the Eagle Nest Mountain, the Bronzebeard dwarves from the Iron Furnace Castle, and the Silver Hand from Lordaeron. At this point in time, this was the standard definition of the enemy's rear. Duque didn't expect anyone to come here to help him, but who knew that he would meet an important person, Prince Muradin Bronzebeard. He was said to be a prince because the father of the 3 Bronzebeard brothers had died, and now Magni Bronzebeard was the king. As Magni's second brother, Muradin was naturally promoted to a prince. After the little female dragon ran away, seeing Muradin and a group of dwarven warriors emerge from the ground, Duque was dumbfounded. "Why are you here?" "Nonsense. You, the deputy commander of the Alliance, can come. Why can't I, the Cosmodan dwarf, be here?" Yes, dwarves were always so simple and direct. In the eyes of humans, this was almost too rough. Duque couldn't help but smile. That's right. Strictly speaking, this was still dwarven territory, just that it was occupied by the Horde. I was wrong. I'm so happy to see you, my friend. Duque bent down happily and opened his arms. Duque immediately knew that he was too happy. "Welcome, Bronzebeard dwarf, my eternal friend." Muradin, who was carrying at least 60 kilograms of armor, almost pounced on Duque and gave him a bear hug. The Duque could clearly hear the crisp sound of his bones. Just a little more, and Duque felt that he would have broken many bones all over his body. Muradin immediately realized that he had gone too far, and immediately let go of Duque. "Damn it, you human mages just have weak bodies. Ooh, I'm asking for it. It's my fault. I'm just a university animal, and I transmigrated to this body. You're blaming me? I'm already training. I'm training, all right." Chapter 481. Duque lamented in his heart as he complained, Not every man is called Arnold Schwarzenegger. Alas, Azeroth was still a world with backward medical care and harsh natural environments. Babies who weren't particularly strong couldn't survive to adulthood at all. In a sense, the average physique of modern people was actually far inferior to that of medieval European adults. That was a long story. Ahem. Duque coughed a few times before he could catch his breath. Muradin glanced around. Come on, let's get back to our base. The dwarves really had burrowed out of the ground. No one would have thought that under the wet, muddy swamp, the dwarves had opened countless tunnels. They weren't simply reinforced with wooden planks, but tunnels with standard beams and pillars, as well as stone roofs. Looking at the tunnel, which was rather low by human standards and was wet from time to time, Muradin immediately apologized. I'm sorry, my friends, we didn't mean to mistreat you. After all, this is built to dwarven standards. The most majestic dwarf wouldn't be taller than 1.6 meters. So the dwarves already found the tunnels at a height of 1.8 meters to be very comfortable. This was hard on the big guy, Gavin Rad, who had to crouch all the way along. Walking in the tunnels, everyone got over it. Only Marion used her magic, a little disgusted. She covered the entire ceiling, walls, and ground with frost elements to make sure that the places she walked were relatively clean. Muradin frowned but didn't say anything. As they walked and talked, Duque finally learned why Muradin was here. At the beginning of the alliance, Muradin had stayed in Lordaeron as the highest representative of the bronze-bearded dwarves in the alliance. He also tried his best to get support for his country. Muradin soon discovered that, in fact, it was enough for him to deal with Duque. Because as long as his request wasn't too outrageous, Duque would get it for the bronze-bearded dwarves even if he had to go to other human kingdoms to extort, and use his own fleet to deliver it directly to the meeting point on the northern coast of Ironstove Castle. Medicine, food, even iron ore. Duque did the best that an ally could do. Over time, Muradin and Duque became very good friends. Recently, the alliance had begun to switch from defense to offense. Muradin could no longer sit still and handed over the work to his deputy. He immediately rushed back to the Iron Furnace Fort. In a situation where Magni was unable to allocate more manpower to him, the second son of the Bronzebeard family relied on his dozen or so good friends to attack the mines controlled by the orcs and rescue many of his compatriots from within. Then, relying on these rescued compatriots, they organized a resistance army in the wetlands and attacked the orcs everywhere. Duque couldn't help but laugh involuntarily. I was wondering why the sky was filled with flying dragons, but it turns out they're actually searching for you. Duque felt like he had been implicated. Muradin did not show any weakness. Isn't it to prepare in advance? When you attack Solderbridge, we can support you from the south. Duque smiled bitterly. After walking for more than half an hour, they finally arrived at the base of Muradin's rebel army, the Verga excavation site in the southern part of the wetlands. Unlike the excavation site in the future, which was filled with all sorts of things, this was now just the dwarves' excavation site. The innumerable pits and complicated terrain gave the orcs a headache. To the orcs, the dwarves here were even more troublesome than groundhogs that loved to dig holes. The orcs had temporarily abandoned this place. In a sense, this was a liberated area for the dwarves. In the huge cave, the dwarves here noticed the guests Muradin had brought, as well as Sasha and Marion in the group. A dwarf's eyes lit up. Beautiful elven ladies. And two of you. The dwarf ran over and bowed clumsily. Falstead the dragon catcher is at your service, elven ladies. Note that this fellow only bowed to Sasha. Only then did Duque realize that before him, the high elves of Kuel Salis were the dwarves' only truly trusted allies. Of course, this did not completely explain why Falstead's attention was focused on Sasha. It wasn't just him, most of the dwarves' gazes were focused on her. Evidently, they found her very charming. Ugh, did you forget someone? At the side, Marion had her hands on her hips, the word, annoyed, written all over her face. Duque hurriedly tried to smooth things over. All right. For the sake of your liberation, let's get down to business. The group of 5 ignored this little interlude, and went to an even more secluded cave within the large cave. It was very narrow when they entered, and there was a huge sluice gate. According to Muradin, it could even block out dragon breath. When they arrived at Muradin's command center and saw the flags representing the orcs on the sand table, Duque immediately realized that things were more troublesome than he had imagined. He saw many small flags near the Grimbader fortress that was now under the control of the orcs. Muradin introduced them to Duque one by one. Those damned green-skinned creatures knew this day would come. Ever since Orgrim and the Horde suffered a tragic defeat at the gates of Lordaeron, the Horde's forces began to gather here. Look, these are all second-rate clans of the Horde. Each clan has about 10,000 to 30,000 people, and most of them are adult orcs. This is a steel tooth, that's a digging tooth, and that's a broken axe. Duque narrowed his eyes. Without the Red Dragon army, the victorious Alliance army would not take long to reach the Cosmodan region. Yes, the Alliance of Lordaeron might have to go all out to reach here, but Duque had no doubt that the Alliance could do it. Duque could almost imagine the scene of the Alliance army gathering north of Sodder Bridge. However, as long as Orgrim was still the chief of the Horde, he could imagine that the Alliance wanted to further weaken the orcs before the army attacked. The simplest way was to kill the Red Dragon Queen, or rescue her. Also, the clumsy Lordaeron elite bandits had already sounded the alarm for the orcs. This situation was at least 10 times harsher than the rescue mission in history. Now, more than 100,000 orcs had surrounded Grim Battle. Even if the combat power of these second-rate clans was at most half of the orc warriors of the Blackstone and Warsong clans, and not much stronger than ordinary human soldiers, they were still not 100,000 pigs. Duque, you said you want to save the Red Dragon Queen? Are you confident? If you are, I have 1,000 elites here to carry out a feint attack for you. The heroic Muradin was definitely a friend. One look and you could tell that he was the kind of good brother who was willing to go through mountains of knives and seas of fire for his brothers. Chapter 482. In history, Muradin and his younger brother, Buf Lang Bronzebeard, founded an organization known as the Association of Explorers. Later, one of Muradin's adventures took him to the icy hell of Northrend in the north. There, he began to search for a cursed sword called Frostmourne. However, he was surrounded by a large number of undead troops and forced to retreat. Under the fierce attack of the undead troops, he found himself rescued by his old friend, Arthis. In this way, Muradin followed Arthis step by step into a dead end. Even when he saw Arthis disobey his father's orders and burn the departing ships, even when he saw Arthis recruit local mercenaries to fight for him, and then kill them treacherously, Muradin still did not abandon him. It was not until he defeated the guards and found Frostmourne that Muradin read the inscription on the tablet, told him that it was a cursed sword, and immediately prepared to leave. However, Arthis did not care. He walked to the pedestal and took out the sword. The sword burst out of its ice prison, and the flying fragments pierced through Muradin like spears. Muradin did not die, but this became an eternal pain in Muradin's heart. Duque sighed quietly in his heart. He did not want these dwarfs to die. Moreover, the most critical piece of the puzzle in the plan was still missing. Muradin was keen on the war with the orcs, but unfortunately, with the intervention of the dragons, the war between the Alliance and the orcs became a very insignificant matter. Compared to the Wing of Death, Cosmodan's more than 100,000 orcs were nothing. Duque muttered in his heart, "Nisario, where the hell are you?" At the same moment as Duque muttered, Duque suddenly felt two gazes. These two gazes gave Duque a very strange feeling. It was clearly an ordinary gaze, but it suddenly changed. Duque turned his head, but he could not see a single stranger. In the command center, other than his team of 5, there was only Muradin and Falstead, who had just run over to Sasha to please her. This guy was the captain of the Griffin squadron that Cudrin Wildhammer had sent to his cousin Magni. Because there was no need to use the Griffins in the defense of Iron Furnace Castle, he ended up following Muradin. For a moment, Duque almost suspected that his feeling was wrong. But who was Duque? He was one of the best transmigrators after transmigrating to the hell-level world of Azeroth. Duque, who claimed to be an old driver from hell. Duque had always believed in his intuition because he firmly believed that the so-called intuition of danger was just the brain's judgment of dangerous situations. Perhaps he couldn't react rationally, but his brain had already determined that this was a dangerous situation, and he instinctively informed Duque. There must be a reason behind this abnormality. Duque had a plan. Falstead, are you familiar with the Orc Dragon Cavalry's patrol route? Falstead was happy to show off his strength in front of Sasha. If it was still those brainless green-skinned creatures commanding the red dragons blindly, I might still be worried. Because you can never talk to a fool about the rules. When he said this, the entire command center burst into laughter. The orc commander might be more intelligent, but most of the orcs under him were pure boorish men. Dealing with such a person was a headache for both the enemy and friend. Falstead's voice rose an octave, but I found that those stupid green-skinned creatures were fooled by the red dragons. Not every red dragon is willing to work for the green-skinned creatures. Those red dragons purposely formed a patrolling airspace that looked strict, but was actually full of flaws. As long as you are willing to trust me, I can use the griffins to fly you all the way to the foot of grim battle in the dark. This was the benefit of having a local guide. If Kudrin led the army directly in, it would most likely turn into a large-scale aerial battle. The Wildhammer dwarves were not afraid of death, but Duque did not dare to be so wasteful. Duque whistled, "Not bad. If we can avoid the orc camp, then when we reach the foot of the mountain, I can bring my team all the way to grim battle with illusions." Recalling how Duque used a wide-area illusion to trick the red dragons in the sky, Muradin muttered, "Magic is so convenient. I was thinking that to save the Red Dragon Queen, we would need at least a squad of elite knights and rangers." Duque patted Muradin's shoulder and turned to his team. "All right, let's vote. Do you trust our Wildhammer brothers?" "It doesn't matter." Gavin Rad shrugged. "I will follow your orders, sir." Ronan lowered his head. Marion frowned, but Sasha said directly, "What if we happen to run into a dragon cavalry patrol?" Falstead patted his chest proudly. "If there are less than 4 red dragons, we, the Wildhammer Knights, will tell those big lizards that this is the dwarves' territory." A Griffin Knight squadron had about 15 to 20 Griffin Knights. In fact, this was not a weak force. Seeing Sasha's frown, Falstead comforted her. "Don't worry. If there really is a mishap, we will send you and Mr. Paladin to the ground first." Falstead elegantly ignored the 3 mages. That's right, mages who could not fall to their deaths with slow fall were all F*** King hooligans. In the summer, moonless nights were not easy to find. Duque and his team stayed in Muradin's nest for 3 days before the desired weather arrived. Feeling uneasy, Sasha followed Falstead onto the griffin. The griffin she was riding on screeched at its companion next door, as if it was mocking them. There were 2 people in the same carriage, but on his side, there was a nimble elf girl, and on the other side, there was a burly, fully armored holy knight. The face of the neighboring griffin had obviously darkened. The dwarf knight had to eat a large piece of raw meat before taking off before the griffin brother flapped its wings and took off. Obviously, either Falstead's patrol route was wrong, or they had run out of luck. Even though the moon was dim, 2 new spots in the distance caught the griffin team's attention. These 2 spots in the sky kept moving, growing larger and larger as they charged towards them. "What are those?" Flying at high speed in the wind, Falstead leaned forward and turned to look at Sasha behind him. He knew that this elven ranger had better night vision than him. Sasha's mouth was bitter. "In the name of the Sunwell. Those are 2 dragons." At this moment, she hated the bragging dwarf griffin knight in front of her. What happened to sneaking into the village and not wanting to shoot? Dragons, and there were 2 of them at once. "Are they red?" Falstead pressed, unwilling to give up. "Does that matter? Dragons are dragons. Will there be dragons of other colors on this battlefield? They're charging at us at high speed." Sasha shouted. Chapter 483. As the elven rangers with the best eyesight, Sasha and Falstead's griffins were also flying at the front. Less than 20 meters behind Sasha, Duque glanced at the other griffin riders and saw that the other dwarves had also noticed the two dragons. Without even needing the horn, the dwarven riders immediately adjusted their formation and spread out. On the left and right, 2 teams of 6 griffins quickly moved forward, overtaking the other griffins in the center. The dwarves followed the established strategy and began to protect important guests like Duque. In the distance, the 2 dragons also moved in a strategic manner. For some reason, the movements of these 2 dragons reminded Duque of the 2-plane formations commonly used in modern aerial battles. The larger one flew to a higher position and then flew away from its companion. Duque immediately realized what this giant beast wanted to do. Even if he didn't want to admit it, he had to admit that griffins and dragons had a limit. Griffins could still use tactics to counteract the red dragon's racial advantage against a young red dragon. Once the red dragon rose to the level of a young dragon, apart from Kudran's Griffin King, no griffins could keep up with the young dragon's movements. It was just like how the griffin was a propeller biplane from World War I. If it was up against a more advanced propeller monoplane, it might be able to put up a fight, but against a 5th-generation jet plane, it was just a joke. The dragon didn't climb because it was afraid of the griffins. On the contrary, it was because the dragon was too fast. If it rushed at it, it might miss. But if the dragon occupied the sky, it would be a completely different story. Diving down from the sky, the slower party wouldn't be able to avoid a high-speed dive no matter what they did. The dragon used the sky as a jar, put the griffins and the passengers in the middle, and then caught them like turtles in a jar. These 2 are experienced riders. Falstead shouted excitedly. The one who climbs is especially good. This will be a glorious battle. Glorious my ass. Didn't they say to put down the passengers first? At this moment, Xianxia felt like strangling Falstead to death. Damn dwarf knights. Once their blood boiled, they couldn't care about anything else. According to human legends, dwarves were born from rocks. Of course, this legend had no basis, but it could also describe the stubbornness of the dwarves. Once he made up his mind, he would not change his mind no matter what. There were less than 20 breaths before they would enter battle mode. Xianxia was so anxious that she was cursing out loud. Apart from Lilith, that expressionless and cold ghost, the other 3 Windrunner sisters all had very pleasant voices. Even though Xianxia was scolding people now, it still felt like an oriole was singing. Falstead ignored all of them and actually carried the guests to charge forward. At that moment, Falstead suddenly heard the sound of his own horn from 20 meters away. One short, one long, one short. Wasn't that their squadron leader's signal to retreat? 3 long. This was an order for everyone to retreat together and prioritize protecting the important goods. The strong wind brought about by the high-speed flight made people's shouts almost inaudible. Only the sound of the horn was slightly clearer. The night also made it difficult for the other Griffin Knights to see Falstead's movements clearly. The Dwarven Knights were highly disciplined, so they chose to follow orders unconditionally. Falstead blew his beard and glared. Only then did he realize that Xianxia had touched his horn and given the command without permission. Furthermore, the sound of the horn was right. Hee. Xianxia raised the horn with one hand proudly. Luckily, Duque gave me a brocade pouch before we set off. He told me to open it when you didn't listen to orders. Send an order from the Alliance's deputy commander, Duke Marcus. He orders you, Falstead Dragoncatcher, to immediately descend the Griffin. Otherwise, he will have Sir Kudran Wildhammer forbid you from ever flying again. Falstead was not afraid of anything. He was only afraid that he would not be allowed to fly again. The Wildhammer Knights who soared in the sky were not afraid of dying in the sky, but dying helplessly on their sickbeds. This time, Duque had really caught him at his Achilles' heel. Falstead knew that the situation was not good, but he could only give up on fighting the dragon. Damn it! If the dragon charges down like this, half of us will die. When that happens, you, the deputy commander, will have to take full responsibility. I don't care. Carry out the order. Xianxia also understood that if she chose to retreat in this situation, it would only give the dragon a chance to take them down one by one. But some things were just like that. After going through the test of life and death, Sasha had an unprecedented feeling in her heart. That was unconditional trust in Duque. The fear of wandering in front of the gates to purgatory, the joy of narrowly escaping death, and the feeling of peace and warmth had long been deeply imprinted in the depths of Sasha's soul. She believed that she would never forget this complicated feeling for the rest of her life. I don't care if others believe it or not, I do. In the end, the Dwarven Griffin Squadron, which never backed down, actually ran away. This was out of the dragon's expectations, and also made the two red dragons extremely happy. Because after giving up on speed, these griffins were no different from helpless chicks in the eyes of humans. Suddenly breaking through the dense clouds, the ruler of the sky, the dragon, with unparalleled dominance, proudly descended from the sky. Even closer. In less than 30 breaths, they would be able to tear these annoying birds with little claws into pieces and scatter them in the air. Very suddenly, the two dragons felt that they were seeing things for a moment. Why are there so many griffins? Immediately, the dragons realized that it wasn't an illusion. The griffins swayed a few times, and instantly, a large group of griffins appeared. Not just a dozen, but more than 100. Not just the dragons, but even the griffins themselves were shocked by the additional companions, and let out sharp cries. The knights had a slight headache, but they comforted their mounts. The dragons were dumbfounded. The younger dragon attacked first. It dove down, and with lightning speed, used its sharp claws to grab a griffin. Unexpectedly, not only did the griffin not feel any flesh being cut, it exploded instead. Bam! The explosion didn't cause any damage, but it scared the dragon. Yes, this was a classic case of the other party not wanting to talk to you, so he threw a self-destructing griffin at you. Unexpectedly, after one was blown up, more griffins flew out from the front. The older, more experienced, and more powerful dragon realized that this was a so-called illusion. It tried to determine whether the griffins were real from the sound they made when they flew. It failed. It was shocked to find that the 100 griffins actually made the sound of the wind breaking. The airwaves caused by high-speed flying could not be faked. Chapter 484. The giant dragon's eyes widened, filled with disbelief. Why did he have to make it look so real? The giant dragon felt like it had wasted its thousands of years of life. The giant dragon was dumbfounded. Falstead and Sasha were shocked as well. Sasha turned her head to look at Duque, only to see Duque smiling as he raised a finger. Two energies revolved around it obediently, wind and lightning. Sasha suddenly realized something. If Duque hadn't made a move, she would have forgotten that the Windrunner sisters weren't the only ones who had received the Storm Altar's power. From the start, Duque had gained the most benefits. However, Duque was in a high position and he wasn't the kind of valiant general who led the charge, so he didn't have many opportunities to fool around. True mirror image gave Duque perfect visual deception. Power of Storm made Duque's counterfeiting skills even better. And the powerful Greatest King system gave Duque unparalleled control, making every illusion come to life. It could be said that other than those powerful beings who specialized in magic, no one could tell which of the griffins Duque had created was real and which was fake. Not just the giant dragon, even Duque's own people worshipped Duque in their hearts. The beautiful eyes of the two elven ladies in the team flickered as they watched. A huge disadvantage was actually forcefully evened out by Duque. After all, they were in the sky. No matter how wide the dragon's breath was, it couldn't cover such a large area in one breath. Just when everyone thought that Duque was shameless and the giant dragon couldn't do anything about it, the giant dragon made another move. The dazzling sparks lit up a large part of the sky. Every griffin knight suddenly turned around and saw hundreds of fireballs condensed in the air around the giant dragon's body. Even though it was flying at high speed, these strange fireballs didn't go out and danced around the giant dragon. Magic! A giant dragon that could use magic! The expressions on the faces of the dwarves were very ugly. It was already very difficult to be forced to fight against opponents that were many levels higher than oneself. This dragon could actually cast spells while flying at high speed? Judging from the appearance of those fireballs, They weren't ordinary goods. They were high-end goods created by draconic magic. Dragons were truly a race blessed by the heavens. Not only did they have a magic genius like Krasis, but they also had many freaks who practiced magic and martial arts at the same time. Under the illumination of the fire, the huge dragon's half-opened mouth reflected a dazzling, fierce light. Amidst the ferocious laughter, over 100 fireballs rained down on the group of griffins at a speed even faster than the giant dragon's flight. I don't care if you're real or fake. As long as he was hit by that, he would be done for. When everyone looked at Duque again, Duque's pupils suddenly shrank. Good timing. In terms of the destructive power of magic, Duque admitted that he was no match for Marion. In terms of movement casting ability and control, Marion, a radiant moon, couldn't catch up to Duque, who had the assistance of the system. In Duque's retinas, countless thin lines extended from the fireballs, telling Duque the trajectory of each fireball and the possible changes in direction due to the gale. In midair, countless hands of magic suddenly appeared. Almost at the same time, a large number of fireballs shot out to meet the flaming meteor shower falling from the sky. Boom, 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 boom. A series of explosions sounded high in the sky behind them. The dwarven knights were dumbfounded. In their field of vision, it was the grandest fireworks in the night. The giant dragons were almost mad with anger. Without the urging of the orc knights behind them, the two dragons continued to dive at high speed. They wanted to see how these griffins, who had already dropped very low in altitude, could escape their hunt. Duque had a headache. His illusion wasn't without a distance limit. The limit distance in his retinas had always been clearly marked, and in this movement-casting state, a radius of 300 meters was the limit. He had no intention of sacrificing these griffin knights, but now, he suddenly discovered another problem. After the griffins successfully dropped his 5-man squad, they would inevitably be hunted down as soon as the griffins left the range of 300 meters. Don't think so much. As long as you're safe, our mission is done. Brothers and sisters, let's fight these big lizards to our heart's content. Falstead raised the Tempest hammer high. Sometimes, Duque couldn't help but complain that the Horde's cards were too damn good. The infantry was stronger than the Alliance, and so was the Air Force. If Dan hadn't rebelled, it wouldn't have been so easy for the Alliance to turn from defense to offense. Duque thought of a new plan. A slightly risky but permanent solution. He once again set his sights on Marion, who wasn't good at movement casting. At this moment, a Crimson System alert suddenly popped up on Duque's retinas. Alert! Alert! Unknown super strong boss has entered the skies. Initial evaluation, undefeatable skeleton, immediate retreat is strongly recommended. Do you want to activate the boss battle module? Just as Duque raised his head in shock, a huge hole suddenly appeared in the thick clouds in the sky due to a violent storm. Moonlight shone down. Under the bright moonlight, a dark metallic figure that looked like a titan landed in the middle of the battle between the griffins and the giant red beast. What the hell is that? Falstead opened his mouth with difficulty, allowing the wild wind to pour into his throat. Even the radiant moon elven wizard who thought he had seen many things found himself trembling all over, unable to speak a single word. That young red dragon was already big enough, not the slightest bit inferior to the big red dragon that Duque and Marion had killed a few days ago. However, at this moment, a pair of black dragon wings that were almost 3 times the size of the red dragon filled everyone's field of vision. The dragon's wings flashed with a black metallic light, causing everyone to feel an indescribable sense of shock. A thunderous roar that seemed to even shake the night sky sounded out, the sound waves easily shattering all of Duque's illusions and pushing the griffins away. The sudden appearance of the black dragon almost caused the little red dragon to wet its pants due to the huge disparity in size. It had been so aggressive just a moment ago, but now it was no different from a pug that had seen a large beast. In the darkness, the black dragon's narrow eyes stared at the smaller red beast in front of it in disdain. The orc red dragon roared in a mournful voice, clearly aware that this fellow that had appeared was definitely not on its side. The 4 dragons were of the same breath and branches. The problem was that these 4 colors did not include black. "I'm very sorry, but we might be finished, my elf lady." Falstead looked like he was about to write his will. Chapter 485. The black dragon spread its wings that seemed to be able to cover the entire night sky, and let out a low, mocking laugh from its huge mouth, waking up every tiny existence. Xianxia looked up again. Her eyes widened as she saw a terrifying face. Beneath the pair of huge horns was a pair of narrow, gem-like eyes that shone with a ferocious light. 4 strong limbs that were filled with explosive power, sharp claws, and a bloody mouth that was spewing golden flames of death. Under the night sky, its crimson stripes gave it a terrifying appearance that was beyond imagination. It was like a legendary devil. But what attracted her attention the most was that everything he could see was metal. The metal that was plated and emitted a strange metallic luster under the faint moonlight almost covered the black dragon's entire body. As long as one reached the young dragon level, the natural dragon scales that dragons were born with had proven to be immune to most mortal weapons. Even ballistae could not penetrate the dragon's natural scales. Why did this dragon have to wear armor to protect itself? What kind of metal was this armor made of? There was no answer. Everyone was fine, but she had never seen metal like this. Xianxia did not have the urge to shoot at it, but she instinctively felt that even if she did, it would be a waste of effort. This metal armor clearly conveyed a sense of trance. It had a strength that could not be penetrated by mortal power. And only a very powerful and self-centered dragon would endure the pain of having its body embedded in the alloy. Wings of Death. Xianxia repeated the nightmarish name softly. Wings of Death, Neltharion. In the legends of the elves, there were a total of 5 great dragon aspects that represented mystery and the power of nature a long time ago. Some legends claimed that the red Alexstrasza symbolized the true meaning of life. The other dragon aspects knew very little about them. The elves had already felt their influence, and had even come into contact with them on different occasions. But the elven elders had never leaked more information about dragons. However, among the dragons, there was already one that the world was familiar with. It had told the world in its own way before the other dragons. Although it originally had its own name, it chose Deathwing as its title in order to better despise the weaker ones around it. Deathwing did his best to destroy the worlds built by elves, humans, and dwarves. Even the oldest elven elder didn't know why Deathwing did this. In private, the elves gave it another name, the Forgotten Dragon Aspect. It was a short sentence, but it contained many meanings: abandoned responsibility, chaos, betrayal, and anger. If Alexstrasza represented the true meaning of life, then Deathwing represented the power of destruction. However, such a giant dragon was soaring in front of them as if it was protecting them in its own way. Of course, there was another possibility. Deathwing did not seem to notice the existence of Xianxia and the Griffin Knights at all. Only the red dragon in front of it could be called its opponent, because Deathwing hated its kind of other colors, to the point that if other dragons were to come into contact with it, they would be mercilessly torn apart. A moment ago, the 2 red dragons were still chasing prey that was smaller than them, like cats chasing mice. A moment later, the prey became themselves. Deathwing stirred up a huge gust of wind. Like a curtain of night covering the earth, he rushed past the Griffin Knights in an instant and attacked the other side. In just one move, the smaller dragon was torn in half by the huge right claw of the Wings of Death. In the eyes of mortals, the huge young red dragon was like a broken toy that had been thrown away. Flesh and scales flew everywhere, and it did not even cry out as it fell to the ground just like that. What terrifying lethality! The mortals below were dumbfounded. Unbelievable, Falstead mumbled. We were actually saved by the legendary dragon of extreme evil, Deathwing. The sudden scream was like a slap to his face. He turned his head, and there was nothing in the direction of the scream. However, in the other corner of his vision, he saw the tragic state of his companion. Flames. Just the flames that escaped when the Wings of Death swept across the sky had already caused the death of a dwarf knight and the griffin beneath him. 10 meters away, Falstead watched helplessly as his companion was set ablaze by an evil flame in front of him. It was just a tiny spark, but after touching a human body, the fire suddenly grew many times stronger. From a single spark, it turned into a prairie fire. The high temperature that followed burned the dwarf and the griffin's fur in the fire. Their skin peeled off, revealing their burning muscles, bones, and organs. Then, their blood evaporated and turned to ash. For a moment, Falstead and Xianxia were stunned in midair. Heavens, how many people had been hit? An elf and a dwarf started to panic at the same time. They twisted their necks and moved their eyes to search at their limits. Seeing Marion cry out in alarm, Xianxia jumped down herself. As a mage with a godly skill, slow fall, Marion's jump was more daunting than dangerous. She saw Gavin Rad. The griffin that the Holy Knight was riding on was probably done for, but the Holy Light saved his life again. He seemed to have activated Holy Shield, and after withstanding the flames for a moment, another skilled dwarf knight caught up with the falling Gavin Rad and saved him. Ronan's griffin was blown away by the wind. It could be seen that the dwarf knight was doing his best to help the griffin regain its balance. Even though it was a mess, it was not in any danger. Where's Duque? Suddenly, Sasha's heart was seized by fear. The dragon roar in the sky attracted everyone's attention again. Deathwing and the red dragon roared at each other, the deafening roar getting louder and louder. A few seconds later, the two dragons collided in midair. In that moment, all the dark clouds in the sky seemed to be swept away by the wind caused by their collision. They both flashed their claws and used their long tails to attack each other crazily. Their tails were more than 10 meters long, scarier than any siege hammer in the world. If they were hit, even a small hill would crumble in the blink of an eye. This wasn't a battle that humans could imagine just by listening to the bard's descriptions. The destructive power that the giant dragons displayed made Xianxia think of the legendary god of destruction who specialized in destruction for a moment. Chapter 486. Roar. A savage, angry roar once again drew everyone's attention back to the sky. The battle for the King of the Air had begun as everyone had expected. The red dragon that was caught seemed to want to escape. It tried to go around Deathwing from the side. However, the opponent's larger body was undoubtedly a huge obstacle that couldn't be avoided. The bats on Deathwing's wings were like a city wall, covering the young red dragon's entire field of vision. It gave the red dragon the feeling that it couldn't pass without defeating the opponent. A dragon breath came out. The confused red dragon seemed to want to use fire to burn Deathwing's bats. Deathwing let out a scornful laugh. This was clear mockery. It flapped its wings, like extinguishing a tiny flame on a candle. Just a strong flap of its wings was enough to disperse the dragon breath. To the griffins, this larger crimson dragon was undoubtedly the most experienced one. However, against the more experienced and sharp ancient dragon guardian, its attacks were as childish as a baby's. When it spat out the dragon's breath, it revealed a flaw. The wing closest to the wings of death easily became the target of the attack. Originally, Deathwing only needed to stretch out its left claw to cut through its wing and greatly reduce its opponent's mobility in the air. Unexpectedly, Deathwing chose to tighten its left claw and retract it to its chest. Instead, it gave up on what was close at hand and swung its tail at the red dragon, causing it to move away from itself. This action was too uncoordinated. If one didn't see it clearly, they would think that its left claw was heavily injured in the previous battle and couldn't move. Deathwing wasn't injured, but why did it retreat? At first, Xianxia thought she was seeing things. However, after watching, she realized that Deathwing's attack pattern was indeed very strange. As an ancient dragon that lived by fighting, Deathwing used all of its weapons, mouth, tail, wings, left and right legs, and right claw to attack. Except for its left claw. Deathwing's storm-like agility showed that it wasn't injured, but its left claw was still stuck to its body. No matter how one looked at it, it gave off an incongruous feeling of an expert bullying an amateur. I'll let you have a one-handed advantage. Obviously, Deathwing wasn't the kind of dragon that had the demeanor of a strong. This could be seen from the fact that he instantly killed a young dragon at the beginning of the battle. Why? Sasha said to herself. Why did he do that? Falstead thought Sasha was complaining about him flying away from the battlefield. Sorry, he replied loudly. This is not a battle for mortals, and there is nothing we can do here but wait to die. Elf lady, you'd better hold on to the griffin's saddle. The first thing we need to do now is to get out of here. Leave here? What about Duque? The words pierced the weakest part of Windsor's heart. Wait a minute. Where was Duque? Where's Duque? Sasha screamed and shook the dwarf's shoulder. She didn't even know when she started crying. Falstead, are you going to abandon you and my companions because of fear? Turning around and seeing Sasha's tears, the dwarf's heart broke. Fear? Falstead had never been afraid of death. The problem was that everyone who was still alive was here. He finished it with a single glance. Your man is nowhere to be found. This has nothing to do with cowardice. Those who aren't here are all dead. They've turned to ashes, you know that. The dwarf waved his empty fist in excitement. His rough face was also streaked with tears. Sasha was also in a state of excitement. She didn't even notice the change in the dwarf's way of addressing Duque. At this moment, the battle in the sky came to an end. Deathwing took advantage of its immature opponent's mistake and used its longer tail to hook its opponent's head. The red dragon lost its balance in the air. The huge black dragon wings with dark red veins instantly surrounded the red dragon. Its right claw suddenly tore open the red dragon's bat wings, causing the red dragon's nervous attempt to regain its balance to fail. Under the fierce pull, the red dragon's defenseless back was exposed, as well as its neck that seemed to be waiting for a guillotine to fall. Fly, quick, quick, quick. Falstead urged his griffin. If we don't leave now, we're all dead. The griffin used all its strength to fly away from the battlefield as fast as it could, even at the risk of cramping in the next moment. Sasha twisted her head and stared at the battle behind her. Deathwing bit down on the red dragon's neck, and there was the sound of chewing immediately. The sound traveled far in the dark night. The sound of flesh and blood splattering. The sound of bones breaking. Everything sounded so creepy. Then, with the help of her night vision, Sasha saw a dark red drizzle fall. Blood sprayed from the dragon's neck. The red dragon tried to twist its body, trying its best to escape Deathwing's attack. It struggled with all its might in vain. In the end, it still fell from the sky dejectedly. The seemingly intense battle only lasted for less than 2 minutes. No, it was even shorter, not even a minute. In such a short period of time, the 2 red dragons that were enough to destroy the entire griffin squadron were killed effortlessly by the wings of death. It's over. It's going to be our turn soon. Falstead muttered in despair. What was strange was that Deathwing did not have any intention of chasing after the griffins. It only stared at its left claw in front of its chest, as if there was something inside it. What was it? Or was it someone? The black dragon did not even look at the griffins that were running away in panic. Suddenly, it turned towards the giant rock dam in the southeast of the wetland and flew away. When its huge figure disappeared from the elven ranger's sight, Sasha noticed that its left claw was still closed, as if it was protecting something precious. The Windrunner's third sister finally realized what was on Deathwing's claw. Duque, Deathwing has captured Duque. Falstead, we have to catch up to it. The dwarf looked at Sasha in disbelief. His mouth was so wide open from shock that it looked like a 7-pound cannon shell could be stuffed inside. When he saw the determination on Sasha's face that she really wanted him to approach the ancient ferocious beast, he gulped and said, I am indeed a brave warrior, my elf lady. But I have to remind you that this is too crazy. Chapter 487. Duque is in Deathwing's claw. That's why Deathwing doesn't use his left claw to attack. Sasha pointed this out loudly. It's a pity. Maybe we have to mourn the losses of the highest-ranking leaders of the Alliance and the Horde. Falstead sighed. Maybe Deathwing doesn't like dragon meat and just wants to keep a human as a snack? Damn it. If you say that again, I'll strangle you here. Xianxia showed a rare fierceness, scaring the dwarf into shrinking his neck. Oh wait, Deathwing didn't kill Duque on the spot. That means Duque is useful to him. Right. That must be it. At this moment, Xianxia almost clapped her hands and cheered for her intelligence. The dwarf poured cold water on her. By the way, didn't Sir Marcus give you 2 colorful things before you took off? I think he said something about the second pouch to be opened when there's danger? Pouch? Xianxia didn't know why a man like Duque would make such a fancy thing. When she questioned Duque, this despicable fellow said that it was some kind of pig, some kind of feeling, and some kind of pretentiousness. Anyway, Xianxia didn't understand anything. But this didn't stop Xianxia from blushing. When there was danger just now, she should have opened the pouch. She didn't expect to forget everything in her nervousness. On the griffin, against the strong wind, Xianxia opened the pouch made of white gauze from her bag. There was a line of words written on it. If I'm captured by Deathwing, please don't worry. There's also a small chance that Ronan will be captured. Of course, if that's the case, you might not open the pouch. Seeing the incongruous smiley face at the end of the sentence, Xianxia suddenly burst into laughter. What's wrong? Falstead was stunned. Why did this female elf look so beautiful, like a goddess? Was she actually not a goddess, but a neurotic one? Xianxia didn't answer the dwarf's question and fell into deep thought. Could it be that Duque already knew the truth about the Red Dragon Queen's capture? Could it be that Duque had already predicted that he would be captured by Deathwing? But what did this have to do with Ronan? Her messy thoughts almost drove Xianxia crazy. If they hadn't spent some time together, if Duque wasn't her lord, if he wasn't her sister's lover, if he hadn't saved her life, Xianxia might have suspected that the person she had been trying to save had sold his soul to the evil Deathwing. What does it want you to do, Duque? Xianxia murmured. Or rather, what does it want from you? Thinking back to Duque's position and importance in the Alliance, Xianxia felt a chill run down her spine. What was worse than the death of the Alliance's vice-commander due to a curse? That was the Alliance vice-commander becoming an undying or something, defecting to the enemy and falling. Each of the 5 primordial dragon guardians had their own unique and unparalleled powers. In the eyes of mortals, that was already godly power. Who knew if Deathwing had the power to resurrect the dead or something like that? Actually, Xianxia was thinking too much. Nethario was never that way. The more concerned one was, the easier it was to overthink. After an unknown amount of time, Duque woke up. His back was stinging not because he was injured, but purely because of the tree roots and pebbles he was leaning against. Thinking back, ever since he was tricked by Ghoul Dan and was forced into a life countdown, he hadn't had a good night's sleep. Camping was a common occurrence. Ever since entering the wetland, he had settled down with the dwarves for 2 days. There were some benefits, such as being able to see Xianxia's delicate and curious face every morning when he woke up. Even though he knew that she was his sister-in-law, it didn't stop Duque from using her to reminisce about Aurelia. He knew Aurelia's temperament. Such a strong-willed heroine wouldn't fall in love easily. Once she did, if he died, even if Aurelia didn't die with him, she would be a widow for the rest of her life. Sensing the recent changes in Xianxia, Duque realized that he was also a sinner. It was one thing to settle the big sister, but how did he get involved with his sister-in-law? When he opened his eyes, there was obviously nothing good in front of him. It was still night in his field of vision. The rolling dark clouds in the sky added a dark aura to the world. He was in the middle of a forest, but it was dead silent everywhere. There were no animals moving in the forest, and there were no frogs croaking in summer. No, there weren't even insects chirping. There was nothing but the frightening sound of the cold wind. Even though he was mentally prepared, the oppressive ominous feeling still made Duque feel suffocated. Oh, you're awake? I was thinking of spells that could wake you up in advance without hurting you. Unfortunately, all I know are large-scale destructive spells, and nothing is suitable for this situation. This makes me very annoyed. Wings of Death? Duque turned his head to look in front of him. Actually, he had already checked the moment he opened his eyes. There was nothing there, and a black shadow quickly appeared out of thin air. In just 3 seconds, it formed a hooded figure. The black figure in front of him looked like a clumsy mirror clone created by an unqualified mage. However, there wouldn't be any clone in the world that had such high purity of dark energy, and there wouldn't be a clone that was filled with the arrogance of the standard version of Long Outyin. It had nothing to do with the appearance. Just the dark energy that was leaking out and turning into a solid form was proof enough. The thing that looked like a human continued to change. It was like a high-speed 3D printer was working, and the black shadow formed a more complete silhouette. A face appeared from under the hood. It was a calm, handsome, and confident man. His face was no different from the nobles of Rotterdam. At least that was how it looked on the surface. "Duke Marcus, are you all right? I've confirmed that you're not seriously injured. After all, it's not easy for me to control my strength with those big claws of mine. It's still in one piece. But speaking of which, if I go back and check on any injuries, if I need to send you my medical bills, where can I send them to? Mr. Wings of Death?" Duque replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The corners of his thin lips curled up slightly, forming a stiff and mean smile. The Wings of Death, who had transformed into a human, smiled and asked, "Since you know who I am, it's easy." Chapter 488. A Man and a Dragon. One was sitting on the ground, and the other was standing on the grass. Just like that, they confronted each other. Suddenly, Deathwing said, "You're not planning to attack me or try to escape?" Duque blurted out, "Why should I attack you or try to escape?" Deathwing was a little speechless. In his expectations, this young human would most likely panic after encountering him. He would either attack him like a madman or try to run away while wetting his pants. Duque's calmness was beyond his expectations. In fact, at this time, Duque was madly complaining in his heart. "Attack you? I'm not an idiot who thinks I'm cute after eating some retard today. To deal with you, even in the game, I'd have to gather 25 companions who could kill gods and ghosts. I'm not stupid enough to kill an epic-level boss as an elite monster. Of course, there's no need to mention escaping. If magic wasn't taken into account, in terms of speed alone, there was really no creature in this world that could be faster than the Black Dragon King. Therefore, Duke, who was a transmigrator, calmly faced the Wing of Death, Nisario. The incarnation of the Black Dragon sat down in front of Duque. It was unknown whether he was sitting on a chair that appeared out of thin air, an invisible stool, or a large rock. Anyway, because it was blocked by the robe, there was no way to see it. Deathwing's dark and bright eyes stared unblinkingly at Duque. He tried to kill anyone he stared at with his eyes, completely suppressing Duque in terms of aura. If Deathwing's eyes had the power of something like Shadow Flame or Deep Breath, Duque might have knelt on the ground and shouted, "Tycoon, please let me hug your thigh." Since he was prepared, Duque certainly wouldn't give in so easily. He cheated. Nisario did not know what Duque did. He only knew that the eyes of the human in front of him became slightly hollow. For a moment, he almost thought that the Duque in front of him was not a living human. Deathwing started to feel a little annoyed or impatient. Fortunately, just as Deathwing was about to go berserk because he could not suppress this pitiful low-level creature in his eyes, Duque seemed to involuntarily avert his gaze. Deathwing rarely felt a sense of joy from winning. "Very good, you at least know how to show respect and humility to a greater existence than you," Deathwing said arrogantly. "This is a very good start." Duque remained silent. Of course, in his heart, it was a completely different matter. "Bastard black-skinned lizard, hurry up and hand over the item and scram. Otherwise, don't blame me for chopping off your head and hanging it on the city gates of Stormwind City. Do you hear me, Nisario?" Deathwing said to himself, "But in case you do something inappropriate, it's better for me to warn you in advance." A rock on the left of Duque suddenly began to burn. Then, it melted in front of his eyes. The melted rock instantly turned into magma. The magma did not flow to the ground and simply spread. Instead, under the guidance of a mysterious force, it quickly circled around Duque and the man behind Duque. A huge circle of lava with a radius of about 2 meters surrounded Duque. Then, the lava disappeared quickly and completely, as fast as the rock melted in the beginning. The whole process only took a few seconds. Duque was already on a cylindrical ground separated by a deep trench. The nemesis of the orcs, the savior of the humans, the deputy commander of the Great Lordaeran Alliance, Duke Marcus. At this point, Deathwing paused clearly. But his next words clearly told Duque that he had said so much about Duque's name before was purely sarcastic. Because his next words were, "If I wanted to, this would be your end." Well, full of arrogance, full marks. But Duque was unhappy, and he cursed in his heart, "Deathwing, I'll *CK all the women in your family." Deathwing could not read minds. He was very satisfied with the trembling of Duque's body and the beads of cold sweat that dripped from his forehead. This misunderstanding stems from a lack of understanding of each other. You humans know too little about the dragon race. Duque seemed to be suppressing the fear in his heart and sneered. Are you sure dragons don't turn humans who intend to communicate with dragons into snacks? Duque's joke seemed to be too cold and not funny at all. But Deathwing was very happy. He actually laughed, and his laughter became louder and louder. He became more and more excited, to the point of madness. I remember now. I did do this before. I quickly gave up this method. Human meat is too little, too fragile, and not chewy at all. Deathwing admitted this without hiding it. This made Duque's disgust for Deathwing rise to another level. In his heart, Duque kept muttering something about dark fire Tidahak step of time, something about essence of destruction, something about dark fire blazing dragon's reigns. Well, if Deathwing knew what these things were, he would immediately change back to his original form and slap Duque to death. These items were dropped by Deathwing when he was knocked down in the game. Of course, Deathwing, who did not know that Duque was constantly courting death in his heart, was happy to exert his majesty and terror on this insignificant human. He sat down and stretched out a hand, palm facing up. Above his palm, an image suddenly jumped out. A tiny dragon-shaped image flew in a lush green world. Those dragons were of all kinds of colors, like a seven-colored rainbow. An overwhelming sense of joy filled the air, and even Duke felt a wave of emotion. Jurassic Park. Deathwing's voice reminded Duque of the famous commentary in the animal world. At that time, the world was ours and we protected it well, magic was ours and we guarded it well, life was ours and we reveled in it. Then other inferior species appeared, forms that made us nauseous, lives that were too brief to be worth mentioning. They were reckless, always reckless without considering the consequences. Because of their stupidity, they attracted the demons. Duque spread his hands in his heart. I'm not going to take the blame for Savi's and Queen Azhara. If it weren't for the efforts of our dragon race, this world would have been destroyed long ago. Even 10,000 Lordaeran alliances can't compare to the challenges we once faced. Dragon race. It was our dragon race who worked together to drive the demons out of this world. Deathwing waved his arms excitedly. Duque touched his chin. Well, with a mustache he could cosplay as Germany's Führer. Chapter 489. Deathwing looked at Duque. His dark eyes emitted some kind of psychedelic light as he stared straight into Duque's eyes. The era of our dragon race is over. Elves, then dwarves, and finally humans. They wantonly occupied every corner of this world. Our numbers are decreasing, and what's worse is that we are fighting and killing each other. No. That's just because you tried to kill everyone and were discovered to be cheating. As a result, you were hunted down by 4 families. We clearly made such a great sacrifice together to protect this beautiful world. Why do we have to fight each other? Damn, you can even say such artistic words? Boss Nasario, I don't think the commercial little golden man is suitable for you. How about the Berlin Silver Bear Award for Best Male Pig Trotters? Misleading ideas, bad communication. Yo, I have a phone number for communication, 10086. Do you want it? Sigh, there are too many reasons. Even if I have time to explain it to you, as a human, you won't understand it all. Well, Don't talk nonsense anymore. Let's do it directly. Hand over the thing, and we will disband and never see each other again. Good for you, good for me, and good for everyone. Wings of Death raised his head 45 degrees, looking like he was bemoaning the state of the universe and pitying the fate of mankind. Those 2 drops of tears were enough to make him a sad, beautiful man. As he sighed, the psychedelic color in his eyes became even more intense. Because of those reasons, our numbers have become so few. His gaze turned, and the sadness in his eyes became more intense. He seemed to have seen through Duque's thoughts. The past is the past. The world is always improving. I am willing to make up for the mistakes of the past, for the future of the world and the dragon race, to fight against the evil orcs. Duque, I am willing to help you rescue the captured red dragon Queen Alexstrasza. I believe it. If I were a blind native and not a transmigrator, I might really believe it. Unfortunately, I am a transmigrator. Even if I were blind, I wouldn't dare to believe a word from a psychopath like you. I'm sorry, Boss Nisario. In the spiritual world, Duque looked at the various notifications from the system while making his facial muscles show both touched and dazed expressions. Deathwing was very satisfied with Duque's reaction. He stretched out a hand, and in his palm was a small silver talisman that looked like a badge. Duque seemed to be possessed. His fingers stretched out spontaneously, grabbed the talisman, and took it. Duque looked down at the amulet and carefully examined the magic runes engraved on the edge of it, as well as the black crystal in the center. He could recognize some of the runes, and he seemed to have seen some in the books of Karazhan, but he had never seen most of the runes that belonged to the dragon language. Even so, Duque could still feel the powerful magic coming from it. This was a mana that far surpassed Wizard Qinxing's. Radiant moons, no, even Breaking Dawn wizards might not be able to control it. You will successfully liberate Alexstrasza, my obedient little puppet. After abandoning the hypocritical mask, a strange inhuman smile appeared on Deathwing's face. As long as I have this, I can be with you and guide you step by step towards victory and the destruction of the Alliance and the Horde. After an unknown amount of time, Duque was still standing there like a block of wood. Looking at the words of the system notification, Duque did not dare to move at all. He could only pretend to be an amusing idiot who was really hypnotized. He stood there foolishly, eating the slightly hot night wind as his supper. System notification. The skeleton boss, Deathwing, has left. You have successfully removed the boss battle template. It was only when he saw this notification that Duque completely relaxed and collapsed to the ground. Duque panted heavily and asked, System Elf, has this thing been blocked? The System Elf replied, all signals sent from this talisman will be delayed by 10 minutes. When necessary, I will perform illusion projection on it. That's good. Just now, Duque was really walking on a tightrope. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was dancing on the tip of a knife in front of the gates of hell. That's right, from the beginning to the end, Duque was waiting for Deathwing to appear. Only Deathwing was the key to saving Alexstrasza, and also the key to saving his life. The so-called history had long been changed beyond recognition by Duque, the troublesome butterfly. Saving the Red Dragon Queen in advance, Duque really did not have the confidence to provoke Deathwing. To be honest, from the moment they entered the wetlands, everything that Duque did was to provoke this black dragon boss to come out. Even if he killed the powerful young red dragon Gazela, it was just to prove his worth to the Wings of Death. Duque was not completely sure that Deathwing would find him and not the original protagonist of this incident, Ronin. So even if the unreliable Ronin was a mascot, Duque had to bring Ronin along. Now it was proven that Duque's risk was right. In the original history, it was because there was no other reliable person to save Alexstrasza that Deathwing found Ronin, which later led to the story of the legendary mage Ronin. At this point in time, there was a better and more powerful Duque, so why not use Deathwing? Moreover, according to the sinister and cunning Deathwing's methods, as the Alliance's deputy commander, Duque was much more useful than a mere Ronin. In fact, as long as he survived Deathwing's mind control and was not discovered, Duque was extremely safe. However, Was it so easy to deceive a special existence that was a super boss level in the game? Duque had prepared a lot for this. His greatest preparation and greatest reliance was his one and only system. Since the system could be independent of his thoughts, manage the magic transmission for him, and even repeat the incantation in his mind to cast spells, Duque boldly set up a thinking shell for himself that wrapped around his soul. Simply put, all information from the outside world that attempted to enter Duque's mind would first be filtered by the system, and after a strict but rapid review, it would enter Duque's mind after about a second of delay. Any information from the outside world would first be strictly screened by the system, first converted into simple text and graphics, and finally converted into bioelectronic signals, which were laughed at by Duque's brain. Relying on this preparation, Duque immediately discovered what Deathwing had done to him: hypnosis. This was not an ordinary weak hypnosis. It was also not some kind of psychological suggestion. This was a unique brainwashing thought that came from the ancient god Enzuf. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a brainwashing program. Chapter 490. That year in the ancient times. Nesario was still a good young man. He diligently followed the orders of the Titans of creation and guarded the land of Azeroth day after day, until he found some prisons in the depths of the earth where the ancient gods were imprisoned, and then he was shot. The ancient gods began to whisper to him, even though they were separated by the prison cage, even though he had left the prison area, they were still whispering to him. They whispered to Nesario with a continuous chain of incantations that were more terrifying than Tang Seng in Journey to the West. Just imagine, anyone would be in a trance if someone kept repeating "you're a lowly" in their ear for 20 minutes, not to mention being called at such a high frequency for who knows how many years. The ancient gods gradually eroded Nesario's heart. They made Nesario believe that as long as he destroyed all the other races in Azeroth, he could let his Black Dragon Legion rule the world and enslave the Green Dragon Queen Isra and the Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza. Now the amulet of Deathwing had a similar effect on Duque's brainwashing. It was a low-frequency speech that would not be perceived by the human auditory system. It seemed that people could not hear it, but in fact, the brain would still be able to sense it. Seeing the system prompt translated into the common language, Duque chuckled. "You, Duke Marcus, is the most loyal servant of the great Deathwing. My orders are the highest meaning of your life. As long as I give you an order, even if I want you to kill your dearest person, you will do it unconditionally and without hesitation. My will is your will. My enemy is your enemy." After reading this message that kept appearing in the system prompt, Duque curled his lips. "You should have added, 'It's not me that's wrong, it's the world.' Host, how should I deal with it? Continue to receive it, but in order to avoid being discovered by that stupid dragon, don't block it. Every time you accumulate 1,000 of the same message, delete it automatically. When you find a new command, filter it and notify me." Understood, host. Looking at the darkness around him, Duque suddenly felt a little envious of the elves' ability to see in the dark. In a primeval forest where one couldn't even see their own fingers in front of them, walking at night would either mean encountering ghosts or stepping on some terrible snakes and insects and getting bitten instead. Duque shuddered and gave up on the idea of walking at night. He found a small tree hole and used the power of the storm to remove the stains inside. After asking the system elf to stand guard, he went to sleep. After a night of tossing and turning, Duque was also exhausted. The next morning, when Duque woke up, he felt as if he had aged another year. This was not an illusion. The curse from the demon King Sardras was still devouring his life force. Calculating with his fingers, he realized that he had spent a few days wandering in Rotterdam, 2 days on the road, 4 days after entering the wetland, and 3 days at Muradin's place. 2 weeks passed in a flash. In the countdown timer, he only had 2 weeks to live. Holy F***CK. Let's see if Krasis is good or not. If he isn't, yours truly is going to turn into a ghoul. In history, even someone as perfect as Queen Sylvia didn't dare to see her own sister after becoming the Forgotten Queen. If he really became a ghoul, even Aurelia probably wouldn't be able to bear it. He had to hurry. Who knew what other tricks would come out of it? He tidied himself up. Well, if I don't make the first contact, I guess Deathwing won't be at ease with me. System Elf, start the quarantine procedure. After gently instructing the System Elf, an idea arose in Duque's mind. How should I go to grim battle? This was an experiment, and Duque also knew that he was playing with fire. If he was exposed at this point in time, he would probably end up dead. Duke's heart was filled with thrill and excitement, as if he was on a crazy roller coaster. It was the feeling of dancing on the tip of a knife, playing on a tightrope without any insurance in a sea of fire. Every cell in his body was jumping with excitement, and every inch of his flesh and bones seemed to be on fire. I'm willing to bet that with Deathwing's insidious and cunning personality, even if he left, he definitely wouldn't have gone far. That bastard is definitely hiding nearby, and once he feels that something is wrong with me, he will immediately run over and kill me. Duque muttered to himself. While muttering, he couldn't wait to see the results. In the sea of consciousness, Duque sent the system prompt, "How should I go to grim battle?" He clicked send. Almost as soon as this thought was sent out, the talisman that Deathwing sent out reacted. A video file was stuffed into the system's quarantine area. He didn't know if it was the System Elf's bad taste, but this guy made the video into a file, and the F*King file name was Deathwing01. MP4. After glancing at it, Duque was speechless. System, if you're so awesome, why the F*CK aren't you the sequel to them 2ST Blu-ray movie? Although he was complaining, Duque still clicked on the video. In the spiritual world, Duque had an additional window. The eye-catching woodland just happened to appear in the video. However, this video was a three-dimensional image. Duque gritted his teeth and let the video directly enter his brain. Out of the woodland, there was a rocky wasteland. On the wasteland, there was a barren path that was probably trodden out by dwarven hunters. Through this path, he could reach Grim Battle and the mountain where the beastmen imprisoned the Red Dragon Queen. Looking at the direction of the sun and Grim Battle, Duque immediately knew his approximate location. Deathwing took him very far, from the middle of the wetlands to the mountains in the southeast of the wetlands, probably between Grim Battle and the Boulder Dam. This not only saved him a few days of travel, but the most important thing was that going this way meant that he could perfectly avoid the Horde's formation at the foot of Grim Battle Fortress. After all, there were 100,000 Horde there. He didn't know how many there were, so he couldn't run away from the word, no less. Although this path was a mountain road, as long as he was diligent, he could reach Grim Battle in 2 or 3 days. The image was jumping, and in the next instant, the image of the surroundings of Grim Battle immediately appeared in the image. Before Duque could react, the video began to move. It moved slowly at first, then faster and faster. It was obvious that this view from a bird's eye view wasn't human. It was probably recorded by Deathwing using some special aerial photography method. The video kept following a small path and quickly passed through the forest to a rocky area. There, it turned and continued to speed up. The cliffs and valleys quickly receded, and the trees became a blur. Chapter 491. The image was too fast, and Duque's brain could not keep up at all. It was like buying a clumsy VR virtual reality game helmet, and Duque felt dizzy watching it. Duque had to hold onto the tree trunk next to him in reality to prevent himself from falling to the ground. The hill gradually became tall and steep, and finally became the first row of mountains. At this time, the speed of the image did not slow down. In the end, it suddenly stopped at a special mountain peak. Although Duque felt a little hesitant, his gaze was immediately forcibly pulled over. At the foot of the mountain, Duque's perspective suddenly rose to the sky, so fast that he almost lost his balance. The image climbed up the mountain, and during this period, it deliberately let the mage observe places with footholds and handrails. It continued to rise, and finally reached the entrance of a narrow cave. Suddenly, the three-dimensional image disappeared. It was like Duque was playing a game when it suddenly popped up, leaving Duque in a daze in the spiritual world. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Coming out of the isolated state of the spiritual world, Duque found himself shivering in the middle of the forest at dawn. Almost immediately, Duque felt the gaze again. Even though that person had done it very secretively, the system still faithfully recorded it down. The Deathwing Nisario glanced at you. Duque walked along the route indicated by Deathwing, and when he was about to walk out of the forest, the system prompted again. Deathwing glanced at him. Duque was on fire. Damn it. No one ever told me that Deathwing was a peeping Tom. Duque was annoyed. Originally, Duque almost wanted to curse out loud. However, he remembered that Ronin was even more miserable in history. He was escorted by Deathwing the whole time, completely losing his freedom like a slave. Thinking of this, Duque felt much better. Perhaps it was because Ronin had no status at that time, and Deathwing took a fancy to Ronin purely because Ronin was carrying out this mission. He also ordered Ronin to do this and that without hesitation. But Duque was different. The biggest difference between him and Ronin was fame and experience. Now, Duque's reputation had already surpassed Lothar's, and he was second only to the leader of the alliance, Tarina's king. Also, after experiencing the destruction of his country, forming an alliance, and persisting in the war, Deathwing probably thought that he was a man with an extremely firm mind. That was why he did not directly coerce him, but used the method of brainwashing and guidance. As long as he rescued Alexstrasza and obtained that item, Deathwing's scheme would be considered to have succeeded. Moreover, Duque's identity was even better than Ronin's. This identity could make Deathwing's plot in the original spacetime smoother and more perfect. Duque had a headache. The current situation was that he had indeed obtained the most crucial piece of the puzzle in this incident. However, Deathwing was trying to force him to quickly run to grim battle to complete his mission. If he foolishly ran to complete his mission, then Duque might really be able to save the dying Red Dragon Queen. This way, the biggest beneficiary would undoubtedly be Deathwing. According to Duque's character of plucking feathers from geese that could kill 10,000 orcs, he would definitely not kill 9,999 orcs. Would he let himself be taken advantage of and let Deathwing, the psychopath, laugh out loud? Definitely not. He would rather work himself than let Nisario, the psychopath, have a good time. Duque had a plan on the other side. Sasha and Falstead had almost caught up to Duque. They were not chasing after the Black Dragon King's ass, nor were they chasing after Falstead's griffins until they vomited blood, nor were they elven rangers trying to save the hero. Instead, they lined up neatly and followed. Follow. Sasha, Gavin Rad, Ronin, Marion, and a team of 6 griffin riders. We're very close. Sasha, who was flying at the front, gestured. Immediately, the group of griffins began to slow down and descend. After descending to the ground and landing on solid ground again, both Gavin Rad and the griffin he was riding felt a sense of relief. The griffin grumbled in dissatisfaction. Gavin Rad, who was fully armed, was too heavy. The griffin gave Gavin Rad a look of disdain. The dwarf had no choice but to pat the griffin's neck and let it go out to hunt. It was not easy to feed a griffin. Griffins ate a lot of meat, and using sliced meat for a long time would reduce the griffin's ferocity and combat ability. The best way was to let the griffin forage on its own in a forest with plenty of prey. The smart griffins would return on their own after eating their fill. The remaining 4 members of Duque's rescue team gathered together. Gavin Rad put his hands on his hips and asked, "All right, let me ask you something. How did you know our boss was here?" Sasha raised the pouch that Duque had given her and smiled. That guy said that in order to make this pouch look impressive, he used the most special material. What material? A very special spice. You guys might not be able to feel it, but with my wind perception, this thing is as eye-catching as a lighthouse in the dark. Gavin Rad whistled. All right, let's follow them and see what happened between Duque and the Black Dragon King. Saying this, Sasha narrowed her eyes. The observant Marion discovered that Sasha's pupils started to expand after shrinking, revealing a completely different color, green. Sasha was concentrating her mind. This would blur the boundaries of her vision, but the focal point of her vision would become clearer, and many things that ordinary people could not see would appear. For example, there was a fog-like golden substance floating in the air. The continuous floating substance formed a long ribbon that floated past her head and extended into the depths of the forest. It did not take long for Sasha to find the place where Duque had chatted with Deathwing the night before. Duque was indeed here. Sasha observed the ground and mumbled, "This is his boot print. I can't be wrong. The other one should be a human. I'm not too sure." "Human? I thought I would see a pair of huge claws." Gavin Rad shrugged. His huge pauldrons made his shrug very obvious. "Look here. This is a shoe print." She pointed at a depression in the forest. A clear, heavy footprint had formed a depression in the grass and mud. This is a common shoe for human nobles. It's very tight and uncomfortable. Chapter 492. Gavin Rad looked at his steel boots, and then at the footprint, which was not much smaller but much shallower, and found that it was indeed the case. He whistled and said, "Well, yeah, there's good news. It seems that the big black lizard once greeted our Sir Marcus with the etiquette of a noble. Or rather, did he try to learn the etiquette of a noble from our Duke?" This slightly mischievous joke made everyone laugh, and they felt much more relaxed. There's also the draconic magic. Marion carefully examined the terrifying burn marks around the place where Duque had sat. There were no spreading flames, only the purest control over flames. Deathwing's control over the power of destruction could be said to be at the peak. This discovery caused everyone to suck in a breath of cold air. Their hearts turned cold. "What does he want Lord Marcus to do?" Ronan mumbled. Marion rubbed the place where Duque had sat, and pointed at a mark. "There's clearly a line of words here, written with magic. However, that line of words was erased by the power of flames." Sasha's pupils suddenly constricted. Perhaps it was this line of words left by Duque that angered Deathwing a little, so he used draconic magic to demonstrate his might. However, Sasha immediately discovered more important clues. It was a white mark that looked like it had been made by a fingernail. She did not know how Duque had done it, but when she focused on the white mark, it had been magnified by at least 3 times, and there were 2 lines of words clearly written on it. "I'm safe. Deathwing wants me to save Alexstrasza. At least we're in agreement on this. I need your power, but please keep your distance from me for at least an hour. Deathwing is likely to be near me." This was supposed to be the end, but Sasha suddenly discovered that there was another line of words carved with the power of wind, even shallower and smaller. Apart from her, it was impossible for anyone who had not been strengthened by the storm altar to see it. The first line was, "You asked Ronan to privately inform his mentor that the key to breaking out of this predicament lies with that person." After seeing the second line, Sasha was even more shocked. Sasha took a deep breath and finally controlled her emotions. "Everyone look at this. I'm not sure if your eyes can see it." After Ronan provided a magnifying glass, everyone finally saw Duque's message. "What should we do?" "Of course, follow them." Back to Duque's side. Duque was having a headache. Only those who had interacted with him knew that Deathwing was a brilliant, yet clumsy director. Brilliant referred to his schemes when he was in his right mind. Without the system, Duque would have been brainwashed by the amulet he had given him. What made Duque tremble the most was that he had to continue acting. Otherwise, if Deathwing flipped the table, Duque definitely wouldn't be able to handle it. Clumsy referred to the choices he made when his mental illness was acting up. Deathwing actually thought that he walked too slowly and found a vehicle for him. The first thing he saw was a huge oval object that looked like a rugby ball. The entire ball was made of all kinds of terrible leather. Duque really didn't dare to compliment the craftsmanship. He couldn't guarantee that it would leak at any time. Next was the steam engine at the tail of the oval that was emitting smoke. It was obviously a propeller. That's right. What appeared in front of Duque was an inferior version of the Zeppelin airship, the Goblin death-seeking airship. Azeroth was a magical world. There were mainstream swords and magic, as well as non-mainstream mechanical civilizations. At this point in time, A crude steam engine was already considered a high-end technology. Even though the airship had a clear tribal emblem on it, Duque knew that this was a gift from Deathwing. Goblins, their moral integrity was equivalent to money. As long as they could afford it or the price they wanted, they would definitely sell their moral integrity for money. Therefore, these goblins who worked for the tribe on the surface were actually the underlings of Deathwing's underlings. Just as Best Actor Du was pretending to hide, a familiar voice sounded in his head. "Don't be afraid. They're loyal to me. The goblin airship will save you a lot of time. You and I both want the Red Dragon Queen to rescue us as soon as possible, don't we? Why doesn't His Majesty Deathwing send me there directly? Why don't you just tell me the spatial coordinates?" Duque asked. "I'm trying to avoid unnecessary fighting. Also, there's a very strong mysterious force under Grim Battle that prevents all spatial teleportation." Duque muttered, "You make it sound like the 2 red dragons you slaughtered last night were just bison on the hillside." "Well, I'd rather use all my magic to use, Clash, than take the goblin airship," Duque said firmly. "Go on, the goblin airship is very safe." Duque suddenly realized that Deathwing had used a command format when he said this. In the system prompt, it clearly said, "Deathwing is using a coercive mental command to force you to obey." Duque's head hurt. If he wanted to continue his path as a movie king, then he had to obey. Otherwise, he'd be exposed. The curve of Duque's face softened a little, and his eyes fell into a temporary emptiness. His voice was close to a whisper. "Well, taking the airship is indeed much faster." In the end, Duque still boarded the pirate ship. Yes, his left hand held the casting tool, Light Feather, which was specially used by mages to jump off buildings. Then he silently recited the incantation for Ice Barrier again and again in his heart. Although the goblins were unreliable, Duque was still a little glad. Looking at the rugged mountain ridges that had long turned into the forest below him, Duque realized that if he wanted to avoid the west side of the stronghold where the 100,000 tribes camped, it would probably take him a whole week instead of 2 days. Taking shortcuts was not always a good thing. For example, the behavior of the goblin airship made Duque's nerves unable to relax for even a moment. During the flight, there were all kinds of accidents. Often, after the previous air maintenance, they had to deal with the emergency that had just appeared. Bang! A loud noise made Duque jump up in fright. This time, it was the main steam tank that was leaking. This airship was powered by both water and oil. If one part was working normally, then the other part must be paralyzed. Every moment was no exception. Of course, he didn't know if there was a problem with the similarity in this world or if he hit the 21% mark. Only then did Duque realize that the name of this airship was actually Rolls-Royce Screw. Chapter 493. There was no navigator, no anemometer, everything was judged by sight, and these 2 damned goblins had the guts to drive the airship into the clouds without hesitation. There were a few times when Duque saw cliffs suddenly appear on the side of the airship, but it was Duque who rushed up to steer the airship to prevent it from being destroyed and killed. At that moment, the 2 stupid goblins were still trying to fix the hole in the balloon. Duque, who could not take it anymore, had already prepared for the worst. He directly gave the control of activating the ice barrier to the system elf. Because he could not guarantee that he would have the concentration and reflexes to open the ice barrier at the critical moment to save his life. If the secret of his resurrection was discovered by Deathwing, then he would be in deep trouble. As expected, the 2 goblins were busy repairing the structure. These 2 fellows with boundless hearts even dozed off from time to time, completely ignoring the dangers that were just inches away from them, such as a sudden air leak, a sudden descent from a high altitude, or the possibility of a mountain being installed and so on. Just like that, Duque endured an entire day, and then a sleepless night. For the whole day, Duque almost did not eat or drink anything. Because he would vomit if he drank, and he would vomit even more if he ate. Duque almost suspected that Deathwing deliberately made him suffer so that his will would be weakened, and the hypnosis would be completed as soon as possible. But the next morning, Duque changed his mind. The first light of dawn appeared, and the clouds around them gradually disappeared. So much so that Duque felt that the airship had finally sailed from the sea into the sky. There was no thick fog, and everything within 10 kilometers was clearly visible. The large forest under his feet turned into a rugged, uninhabited wilderness, and he could see that the terrain in front of him was gradually rising, all the way to the cliffs of Grim Battle. Along the way, there were indeed a few small forests along the way, but the overall coverage was quite sparse. People walking in the wilderness would be very conspicuous, and the orc dragon riders could easily see their traces from a few kilometers away. None of the orc dragon riders were interested in the airship that Duque was in. The most recent time, a red dragon even flew less than 500 meters away, and the orc dragon riders on it did not even look at the airship. Even when he flew past, the airship's steam engine made a loud explosion. It seemed like the orcs were used to the gnomes working for the horde for money. Or it could be said that they completely looked down on these little green dwarves who were loyal to the tribe for the sake of the yellow metal. It was a good move for Orgrim to bribe the goblins with the gold he obtained from conquering the human capital. The beastmen didn't want it, but the goblins wanted it. The two sides almost hit it off. Duque narrowed his eyes. He was thinking about how his team of 4 was going to pass this place. After a day and a night of flying, Grim Battle was quite close to them. Sasha and the others who were following carefully on their griffins were also getting closer. At this moment, a major event that did not belong to the original history happened. In the Dalajan city, the kings of the 6 human kingdoms, plus Prince Kudrin, Wildhammer, and Kale, that's a total of 8 leaders were gathered together. Something big must have happened for so many big shots to gather together. Prince Drake Proudmoore, the next king of the maritime kingdom Kurtiras, died in battle. Dalajan Kirin Tor council member Gastala Malo died in battle. Silver Moon council member Balanmind Kaz died in battle. Former leader of the Bloodsail Pirates and current deputy commander of the Stormwind Fleet, Duke Fairville died in battle. Along with the deaths of these 4 countries, there were also shocking losses. The culprits were the ancient red dragons led by Tyrannis Tyrannistus. Every place where 3 or more kings sat could be called a throne room. Now, in the throne room, King Dalin Proudmoore's roar resounded. Calm down? Lothar, you're asking me to calm down? Now the one whose son died is not you, but me. You're asking me to believe in Duque. Alright, I've waited for him for 2 weeks. Every day, every night, my men and I had to brave the threat of those damned lizards and patrol the sea. Now it's all over. This is the result of waiting. Dalin threw out a piece of metal that was mainly gold and had been completely deformed by the flames. This thing made a clanging sound as it hit the floor tiles of the hall. The sound of it bouncing and rolling on the floor pounded everyone's heart. Almost no one could recognize that it was a scimitar. Dalin cried, "The next king of Kurtiras has been sacrificed. He was burned to ashes by a ball of fire right in front of me. This is all Drake has left." Lothar was speechless. If not for the fact that Stormwind had also lost a duke, who knew how crazy King Dalin would have been. Now, this hero of the sea who fought on the battlefield almost every day since the start of the war and gave his all for the alliance was sitting on the floor tiles in front of the throne, bawling his eyes out. Yes, at this moment, there was no king, no admiral galloping on the blue waves of the sea, only a father who had lost his son. As the attack of the Red Dragons became fiercer, the leaders of the alliance who originally wanted to defend the Red Dragon army did not dare to say a word. After all, the alliance with the Red Dragon army was a thing of the past. The attack of the ancient Red Dragon was a real threat now. Every king had a bad look on their faces. King Tyrannis asked in a deep voice, "Is there still no news from our deputy commander?" Silence was the only reply. Crasus, who stood beside Antonidas, wanted to say something, but in the end he remained silent. He had already received the news that Ronan had sent him. Crasus tossed and turned all night, unable to sleep. His most admired queen was still locked up in prison. But the wings of death intervened. That was the wings of death, the one that caused the entire dragon race to fall into civil strife and the verge of collapse. Perhaps if the most powerful magicians of the human race were gathered together, they would be able to fight against it. But only to the point of fighting. Krasus did not think that humans had the ability to kill Nethario. Krasus did not think that humans and elves could do what no dragon had done in the past 10,000 years. After all, that was no longer the realm of mortals. So Krasus chose to remain silent. His mind was filled with the things that happen these days. The news from Duque Ronin made him understand that Duque had reached the pinnacle of mortals. Now it was up to him to find help against the wings of death. But these days he had hit a wall for the second time. When Krasus came back to his senses, the discussion of the kings in the hall seemed to have come to a conclusion. Then it's decided. We will send a large assault team to save the Red Dragon Queen, or kill her, Terenas announced. Chapter 494. The roars in the throne room were still echoing in his ears. I object. Marcus is already on his way to save Alexstrasza. We should always trust our deputy commander, King Lang retorted angrily like an injured lion. I've always trusted him. I gave him 2 whole weeks. But when my son died in battle, he still hadn't gotten rid of those damned red lizards. Daelin retorted mercilessly. The eyes of the Lion of the Sea, who had just lost his crown prince, were horribly bloodshot. Lang was speechless. If it were him, he would also go crazy if anything happened to William. Daelin continued to roar, and the scorching sound waves echoed in the hall. Look at what he's done in the past 14 days. Hundreds and thousands of soldiers at the front line die in the flames every day, but he's spent 14 days on a path that could have been reached by griffins or teleportation portals. There's no progress report, no regular communication, and we don't even know if he's alive or not. How do you expect me and the kings in the throne room to continue trusting him? But our deputy commander who's cursed with death is sacrificing the Alliance's trust in him, King Xion said, hitting the nail on the head. This made Lang's heart skip a beat. Since the start of the war, which country hasn't sacrificed anything? War is bound to be accompanied by sacrifices. Antonidas tried to persuade Lang to give up on Duque. Lang's body trembled. To him and Stormwind, he and Lothar were destined to grow old, and they would have to hand over the country to William, Bolvar, and Duque in the future. And Duque was definitely Stormwind's hope of reviving the country. Be it emotionally or rationally, he did not want to believe that Duque would fail and fall. Anduin could not stand it anymore. At least wait for the last communication. He promised to send a magical message every 3 days. Terenas replied in a businesslike manner, "Sure, but I hope that you will put the Alliance first and allow us to form a large assault force." If there's no news of the deputy commander, Anduin Lothar gritted his teeth. I agree. Things were not over yet. Next up, since Deputy Commander-in-Chief Duke Marcus is unable to carry out his duties, I propose that the Alliance appoint another Deputy Commander-in-Chief, coordinating the actions of the various nations. Jean suddenly raised his hand and said, Lang and Anduin's pupils constricted. What the hell was Gilnis doing? Or could it be that the old bastard Xion had already formed some sort of secret alliance with Terenas? To be honest, without Duque around, there was indeed a problem with the coordination of the alliance. As Anduin's assistant, Turayan temporarily took over Duque's work, but the results were not ideal. Turayan had good leadership skills, but he was unable to handle logistics, troop mobilization, and warfare all by himself like Duque. It had been a year since the alliance had been established. This was no longer the situation where all the kingdoms refused to submit to each other and needed to find a neutral party to take the blame. In the absence of Duque, Turayan's reputation was not enough to convince the masses. That was the most fatal problem. He had never led an army on his own, and he did not have extraordinary bravery or a suitable title. It could be said that Turayan was treated rather negatively by the kings of the kingdoms when he carried out his work. Moreover, in actual combat, there were often situations where the troops had to be split up. One deputy commander was indeed not enough. In the end, High Lord Alexandros Mograine from Rotterdam was elected as the second deputy commander with a high number of votes. In theory, he was ranked below Duque, but every king knew that once it was confirmed that Duque was dead, Mograine would be the actual deputy commander. When they returned to the state guest house, Lang flew into a rage, which was rare for him. Andoin, that bastard Tyrrhenas is trying to make you a mere figurehead. Lothar was silent for a long time. If it's for the sake of the Alliance's victory, I can accept it. I'm afraid that the old bastard is not just doing it for the sake of the Alliance's victory. Lang swept everything on the table to the ground. This was no longer a conspiracy, it was an overt plot. Yes, everyone realized that Rotterdam had changed. In the beginning, everyone from Rotterdam thought that they were the saviors of the world, and that they would save the ignorant people from all the kingdoms and join this seemingly distant war. However, when the horde burned down the Silverpine forest and threatened the holy capital, Stratholm, and even fought their way to Rotterdam, everything changed when the Rotterdam people's dignity was mercilessly trampled on. It was no longer the atmosphere of, no matter what happens at the border, we will still sing and dance in peace. Instead, the whole country showed a hysterical and unreasonable stubbornness. Revenge. Not only did he want a bloody revenge. Moreover, they had to win the battle beautifully. It was a great victory that required the worship of 6 human kingdoms, 2 dwarf kingdoms, and 1 elf kingdom, as well as all of the 9 kingdoms. Tyrrhenas was so proud of his team of thieves, but they had failed. Finally, Tyrrhenas had waited for this opportunity. The worst thing was that as the leader of the alliance, Rotterdam, had set a very bad precedent. Just as Lang was throwing a tantrum, the guard sent a message saying that Duque's maid was asking to see him. Duque's maid? Yes, we've all seen her. Her name is Vanessa Van Cleef. Van Cleef? Lang, of course, remembered this surname. It was one of the 2 heroes who helped the people of Stormwind obtain a base of operations behind enemy lines. Let her in. Vanessa entered and said something that made Lang furious. Your Majesty, please save my master's disciple, Miss Ilucia Barov. The nobles of Rotterdam want to force her into marriage. What? Lang and Andoin lost their voices at the same time. Almost everyone in the alliance knew about the relationship between Duque and Ilucia. Ilucia, who had become Duque's right-hand man, appeared on many occasions as Duque's spokesperson. For example, she represented Duque at Kuel Salas's diplomatic banquets. No one in Stormwind would have thought that Rotterdam would make a move on Ilucia after losing contact with Duque. From Vanessa's angry narration, Lang and Andoin understood the whole story. In the end, it was just one sentence. Tyrrhenas had his eyes on the land of Alterac. Rotterdam was hurt. The nobles of Rotterdam not only desired glory and blood for revenge, they also desired real benefits. The bloodline of King Eden had been severed. Eden himself had betrayed the alliance and humanity, and would eventually be nailed to the pillar of shame. The last obstacle to controlling Alterac was Duke Barov. There was news that the Duke's 2 sons had joined the Horde, but this news was not confirmed. Chapter 495. But now, all of Alterac's soldiers were fighting for the Alliance in order to wash away this humiliation. At this time, a rubbish baron from a small family that was not ranked in Rotterdam proposed to the Barov family, hoping to marry Ilucia. I am a descendant of the noble Arthi, the Pavan family of East Tirisful. Our Baron Bas Pavan sincerely proposed to Ilucia for 1,000 gold coins. If the Barov family desires the protection of Rotterdam, then a marriage alliance with our family is your best and only choice. Vanessa angrily mimicked the tone of the messenger. The pitifully small betrothal gift and the arrogant words made it seem as if he, a mere baron, was condescending to marry Ilucia. Ryan was already infuriated by Vanessa's retelling of the story. How dare the people of Rotterdam do this? Andoin roared, his long hair fluttering due to his intense movements like a lion's mane. Ilucia is not only Duque's woman. She is also my earl. A rubbish viscount dares to do this? Lang was the one who agreed to confer the title on Ilucia. Although it was a frontline conferment, there was an official conferment process, and it was announced to all the countries in the alliance. No wonder Lang slammed the table on the spot. That bastard dares! Miss Lucia clearly objected. But Duke Barov was silent for a long time, and did not object or accept, only saying that he would consider it. That's right, Alicia did not belong to Alterac in theory. But as long as the blood of the Barov family flowed in her body, she could not completely escape the shackles of the Barov family. The people of Rotterdam knew this, and found a loophole to propose to Duke Barov directly, instead of going through the Stormwind. The flames of anger ignited in the hearts of the king and the minister, and along with the strong beating of their hearts, it poured into the main arteries and into every corner of their bodies. It was rare for the guards to realize that their two bosses were angry. It was the kind of thunderous rage that was ignited. If this is a test by Tyrrhenus, Lang raised his fist. Then let's go tell him our answer together. Anduin's fist collided with Lang's. At this moment, a guard suddenly rushed in. Your Majesty, this is an emergency. Near South Shore, General Windsor led his private legion to attack the camp of the Rotterdam people. What? Lang was shocked. And Bolvar and Tom? Asked Anduin. Duke Verdragon is at the wall of Saladin. General Seamus went to inspect the Jasper mine. Lang and his childhood friend looked at each other and immediately understood that they had to go together to suppress the situation. In fact, when Vanessa came to the Dalajan to meet King Lang, Duque's men were in an uproar. Because it was a secret operation, Duque did not take most of his men with him. After hearing the news, Makarov and Duke's cavalier Captain Kasser immediately led their men to seek justice. What was the concept of 100 knights? A weaker duke could not even afford to keep 100 knights. One could imagine how shocking it was when 100 fully armed Highland knights went to the camp of the Rotterdam nobles. Because of the recent attack by the Red Dragon, the camps of the various countries were almost all set up together. This was to gather a limited number of ballistae, archers, and mages to better deal with the Wyvern. Also, because it was located at the rear, the camps of the various countries were separated by the simplest wooden fences. In fact, before the knights reached the camp of the Rotterdam nobles, the people of Rotterdam had already discovered them. After all, they were too big a target. The soldiers guarding the camp looked over in confusion, then froze for a moment, and their faces darkened. The soldiers of Rotterdam who were doing their own things in the camp were also stunned. Go back, you Stormwind people, this is not your turf. The guard yelled angrily. Before he could finish his words, Cass had already rushed forward and immediately shouted, "Get the paven out first." Without needing to say anything, the knights next to him threw a few grappling hooks over. There was no need for the people of Rotterdam to open the gate. A magnificent group of 6 knights separated to the left and right, and the ropes tied to the saddles pulled the grappling hooks. With a loud bang, the wooden gate of the Rotterdam nobles' camp was blown away. The collapsing gate smashed onto the back of the guard who had shouted, and the immense force caused the guard who weighed close to 100 kilograms to fall to the ground like a tortoise. When Casa and the rest of the 90 knights rushed into the camp, the soldiers of Rotterdam only then realized that the Southerners had rebelled. How dare they rush into Rotterdam's camp? One by one, they put down what they were doing and surrounded the knights in anger. But who was Casa? He was an elite Highland knight who had been trained in Arthi. If not for Salas who could not support so many knights, would he have come to serve Duque? In the world of magic, knights were rather fragile, but to these ordinary soldiers, they were all existences at the level of a father. With a sudden thrust of his lance, he stabbed a soldier of Rotterdam who tried to stop him, causing him to vomit blood. Why did he vomit blood and not stab him to death? Because Casa did not completely lose his mind. He and his men were all using blunt wooden lances that were used for practice. However, the huge impact hit the guy's iron armor, causing him to vomit blood and fly backward. He fell to the ground and could not get up for a long time. The people of Rotterdam were stunned. Without stopping at all, the 100 cavalrymen were like one person, charging straight towards the tent with the banner of the Paven family. A knight pulled out his blunt sword and slashed the shoulder of a Rotterdam man who tried to stop him. There was also a knight holding a shield and slamming it with it. Of course, Casa was the best at fighting. When he reached the place, he immediately grabbed the person in question. He grabbed the bastard who dreamed of being a baron and the daughter of a duke, and greeted him with punches. Originally, Casa was tall and strong. With his iron gauntlets on his fists, he felt that the guy was going further and further down the road of ugliness with every punch. The knights were really angry. They picked up the things beside them and smashed them on the heads of the Pavan family people. How many soldiers could there be in a small family with only one baron and 2 viscounts? Except for the 2 knights and more than 20 professional spearmen, they were all farmers. After Casa knocked the baron named Bus to the ground, he continued to kick him. "Go to hell. Bastard, you want to marry our countess for 1,000 gold coins. A dog wants to eat dragon meat? You dare to snatch our duke's woman? Since you've gone crazy thinking about women, I'll tell you what the cruel reality is." Chapter 496. The people of Rotterdam were dumbfounded. They had seen fierce ones, but never this fierce. After all, apart from mages, paladins, and other mystical beings who could use extraordinary powers, the most powerful force in a country was the knights. The average knight trained for 8 to 10 years before finishing his apprenticeship. Their combat power was not to be underestimated. Normally, a fully armed knight on a horse could take care of 10 ordinary soldiers and 100 peasant soldiers. 100 knights went up and easily beat the people of the Pavan family into dead dogs. In fact, there were only 40 people who attacked directly. The rest were divided into teams of 15, guarding the 4 sides. Any Rotterdam people who dared to come near would be beaten up. They would not stop until the other party was beaten to the ground. If this was Terina's army camp, or the army camp of a lord like Mograine, it would be impossible for him to survive. Perhaps the Rotterdam people had already fought back. Unfortunately, this was a noble barracks. They came from different families and they were competitors. After discovering that the Stormwind people were only targeting the Pavan family, a group of nobles also joined in the fun and reported to their superiors. Duke Charmas was the trusted aide of King Terina's, and he knew about this test. Almost as soon as he received the news, his stomach hurt. In fact, after completing the defense of Rotterdam, when Terina's realized that Rotterdam had a chance to take over Alterac, they suddenly realized that they had acted a little too late. This was no longer a simple matter between Rotterdam and Alterac. It involved Stormwind. Now that the threat of the Horde had not been eliminated, Rotterdam could not fall out with Stormwind, one of the main forces of the Alliance. Therefore, this was just a test. Whether it succeeded or failed, Rotterdam would not do anything further to avoid provoking the other kingdoms. It would be good if the Barov family was obedient. If the Barov family was not willing, then there would be plenty of time to deal with them after the war. However, by then, Rotterdam's appearance might be more ugly. Charmas did not expect the reaction from Stormwind to be so intense. He immediately rushed to the nearby camp to find Mograine. The people of Stormwind came to the camp of the 5th Legion of Rotterdam to cause trouble. There were nearly 100 knights. The gendarmerie could not handle it. Mograine had just received a magic message. He had been appointed as the Alliance's vice-commander. Who would have known that someone would cause trouble right after the promotion order was issued? If this wasn't a slap in the face, what was? Originally, he was the supreme commander of this place. Now that something had happened, he naturally could not shirk the responsibility. Mograine was a pure soldier. Without another word, he ran out of the tent and called for his 3,000 elite soldiers. They rushed to the scene of the incident aggressively. Not long after he left the camp, he realized that something was wrong. The moment he stepped out of the camp, a bugle horn sounded from another camp not far away. When he was halfway there, he discovered that the Stormwind army had already rushed out of the camp like a tide. The corners of Mograine's eyes twitched as he stared at Charmas beside him. He cursed in his heart, "Chung, you bastard, you tricked me?" It had been proven time and time again that the nobles' private armies were rarely capable of fighting. The number of ranked private armies in the entire alliance could be counted on one hand. The person standing in front of him was one of them. It was Duke Duque of Stormwind's private army. Before Quel Salis had joined the alliance, Stormwind had given half of the Griffin Legion to Duque. Not only was this private army overstaffed, they had fought from the Elven Forest all the way to Quel Salis. They had fought dozens of battles, large and small. They could be said to be elites who had fought from the south to the north. Their bravery was no less than Noxus's First Legion of Stormwind. Mograine's teeth hurt the moment he saw this army blocking his way. "General Windsor, what are you doing?" Windsor was a righteous man, but Makarov beside him was not. As Duque's mouthpiece and the first confidant to follow Duque, he was not only loyal, but had also learned many of Duque's evil tricks. Makarov rode out and shouted, "I'm sorry, General Mograine. Our Stormwind Kingdom's Countess Ilyusha Berov was humiliated by your kingdom's Baron Bas Pavin. Baron Pavin attempted to marry Countess Berov with a betrothal gift of 1,000 gold coins. Duke Marcus's knight captain, Cassar Ulysses, could not tolerate such humiliation and went to duel with Baron Pavin. This time, Charmas was also anxious. If Mograine's elites arrived quickly and captured Duque's knights, even if King Lang came later to ask for them, at least King Terinas would not lose face. But now, the other side seemed to have predicted it and did not hesitate to send a large force to stop Mograine. Charmas could not imagine how angry King Terinas would be when he returned. Charmas did not care about his demeanor and directly cursed, "Duel? Bullshit. We received reports that your knights beat up our nobles. This is a great humiliation to the glory of the kingdom of Lordaeron." At this time, Windsor stepped forward. "We belong to the same alliance now, don't let other countries see us as a joke. Why don't we retreat first, then each take 100 people in to see the situation, and then discuss?" Mograine stared at Charmas. "Okay." The army retreated, and when Mograine brought his men into the camp, he was instantly stunned. The surroundings were a mess. In order to avoid being affected, more than 4,000 noble private soldiers were like rabbits being chased into a corner, almost squeezing against the camp wall and shivering. The camp gate was demolished. The demolition method was simple and violent, which could be seen from the fact that the camp gate was dragged more than 30 meters away. Then everything between the camp gate and the Pavin family's camp was flattened. From tents to ordnance, from campfires to camp beds. Mograine's eyelids twitched as he walked. It was one thing for the Stormwind wolves to be troublesome, but their combat strength was also very strong. Finally, Mograine saw Baron Pavin, who was beaten to the point of death and did not look like a human. If it were not for the fact that the guy was covered in mud and could still vaguely recognize the badge and robe, Mograine would never be sure that this guy was always as arrogant as a swan. Charmas was angry. "Duel? Is this still a holy duel? You call yourselves knights, and you even threw away the glory of the knights. This is blasphemy. This is the greatest humiliation to the great kingdom of Lordaeron. I want to report this to the leader of the Menethil Alliance. I want Stormwind to publicly apologize." His sharp voice echoed in the silent camp. Ilyusha, who was following closely behind Windsor, was stunned. At this time, Makarov came out, leisurely took a drag on his cigarette, and then said slowly, "I think Knight Ulysses just threw his gloves to Baron Pavin." With that, Makarov raised an iron glove that weighed a full 2 pounds. Chapter 497. You call this a fucking glove? Even a lighter rapier is not as heavy as this thing. A glove is a glove, and a gauntlet is still a gauntlet. Look at you, it's actually a one-piece, with alloy plates attached to the places where the fingers can move. It stands to reason that this is definitely a gauntlet, but because it contains fabric, it's not impossible to call it a glove. Anyway, seeing Cassar's glove, Duke Charmas almost spat out a mouthful of blood. He trembled and scolded angrily, "You're quibbling. First, a glove is not like this. Second, how do you explain Baron Pavin's face full of scars? Cassar has really been led astray by Duque. As the captain of Duque's knights, from the moment he took the oath, his future was tied to Duque's. He strictly remembered Duque's instructions before he left, and activated his acting mode that barely reached the Oscar level. First, I swear in the name of my master, Duke Marcus, that this is definitely a glove. Second, I just threw the glove on Baron Pavin's face. Here, just like this. In front of Duke Charmus, in front of Mograine, the newly promoted deputy commander of the Alliance, and in front of Elucia, the biggest victim of the incident, the bastard Cassar once again threw the gauntlet that he had taken off a long time ago onto the face of the Baron who had already fainted. Pa! There was a loud sound, and the scene was painful. What was the difference between this and being hit in the face with half a brick? Baron Pavin walked further and further down the road of unrecognizable disfigurement. Bastard, Duke Charmus scolded. Mograine could not continue even half a word. Elucia covered her mouth in surprise, looking at the legendary tragic object that could become her man. Cassar, who was obviously a handsome man, continued to play dumb, but Baron Pavin ignored my request for a duel. Is he still a man? As a noble? I am a baron and he is a baron. How could he refuse me so cowardly? How dare such a despicable, cowardly, good-for-nothing man call himself a noble of Rotterdam? After saying that, Cassar picked up the gauntlet that weighed 2 kilograms and threw it at the unconscious Pavin in front of Charmus and Mograine. That's why He challenged Baron Pavin to a duel again and again. Pooh! The people of Stormwind were not the only ones who burst into laughter. Even the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom could not help but burst out laughing. Aren't you a little too fake? Asking for a duel again and again? Are you sure you're not venting your anger? The originally smart, capable, and handsome knight captain now wore a retarded expression as he recited the lines left by Duque and beat up the bastard baron in front of everyone. There was no need to mention how much the Tempest man had vented his anger. Still covering her mouth, Elucia's eyes were already blurred by tears. She knew. She knew that everything was left behind by Duque. Without Duque's instructions, Cassar, who had always been strict with the spirit of chivalry, would never do such a thing. Makarov would never bring people out to cause trouble. There was no way Windsor would mobilize his 10,000 private soldiers to confront Mograine, the most famous general in the Alliance. Even if Duque was temporarily absent, Duque still took care of her and the Barov family behind her. Last year, when Duque came to the Barov family for food, he promised that if the Barov family was in trouble, he would protect them. Today, the attitude of Stormwind was unknown, but it was clear that Duque was fulfilling his promise. There were many men who were willing to make promises, but there were very few who were willing to take huge risks and still fulfill their promises. If the condition of going against the most powerful human kingdom in the world was added to the condition, it would be even less than 1 in a million. But Duque did it. Originally, Elucia was already in despair. King Eden courted death and destroyed the entire kingdom. Without a kingdom, all the nobles were like castles on the beach. They looked magnificent, but when the waves came, they would collapse. 2 disappointing younger brothers first betrayed the alliance and then disappeared. Who knew how the Barov family would be dealt with after the war? Think about it. Even General Haas, who did not participate in the rebellion, led his soldiers to become cannon fodder. The once incomparably noble Barov family was now just an empty shell, mercilessly squeezed out of money and resources. In the past, those who dared to propose were either dukes or at least the first in line to the Grand Duke's throne. Now, a Lordaeron baron dared to come and defecate with his nose in the air, as if marrying him was beneath him. Her best friend in Lordaeron secretly wrote a letter to her, asking her to accept this humiliating marriage. Give up. You are no longer that high and mighty Grand Duke's daughter. Alterac has not yet fallen, but it's not far from it. A fallen king will not have a good ending, and a fallen noble will not have a good ending either. In history, many men who participated in the rebellion were hanged, and many daughters who were implicated became the victor's playthings, dying with hatred. To be honest, on the day of Alterac's incident, Elucia had a premonition that this would happen. However, at that time, Duque was there to support her heart, opening his broad chest to become her, and even the entire Barov family's safe harbor. Even if her parents did not think that Duque would protect them until the end, she was still willing to believe in Duque's promise. The day Duque was exposed to the curse of death in Lordaeron was the fuse that nearly caused Elusia's heart to collapse. From that day onwards, Elusia had truly given up hope. However, at this moment, she was shocked to find that her daily prayers seemed to have been answered by the gods. Yes. Duque was still magical. He was still the creator of miracles. Even if he was not here for the time being, he was still firmly in control of the situation. If that was the case, what was there to worry about? I was so stupid. I should have believed in him until the very end. Even if everyone thought that Duque would die from the curse, I should not have given up this hope. Elusia suddenly raised her head. Everyone could see her teary eyes, and everyone could see the renewed determination in her eyes. She smiled. Smiled brightly. Then Casa smiled, Makarov smiled, and even the righteous Reginald Windsor smiled. Not only them, but everyone in Stormwind smiled knowingly. Duque might really die. Duque's will would be passed on, even if there were only them left on this path. But if anyone wants to bully our people, have they asked for our permission? Have they asked if our fists are fierce? Have they asked if our swords are sharp? If anyone is shameless, we will slap their face. If anyone dares to stretch out their claws, we will cut off their claws. Duque, you are with us. We are with you. Chapter 498. Originally, when Tyrrhenas arrived, he wanted to drag out Baron Pavin, who had been beaten beyond recognition, and ask for an explanation from Lang. To be honest, it was indeed an insult to marry a duke's daughter with a dowry of 1,000 gold coins, but the great Rotterdam kingdom could not take it lying down. Tyrrhenas did not ask for the Stormwind to hand over the culprit. He was just trying to put some pressure on Stormwind, at least so that Stormwind would not interfere when Rotterdam Kingdom annexed Alterac in the future. At this time, everyone could guess what happened. Including Lothar, all the Storm Royal Knights at the scene threw their gauntlets at Baron Pavin with all their might. Baron Pavin, I want to duel with you. Everyone shouted loudly, scaring the old Tyrrhenas half to death. Baron Pavin, who had been pulled out to be used as a spear, was knocked unconscious again on the spot. Well, it was a miracle that he did not die after being smashed by these violent, muscular men. Tyrrhenas finally realized the Storm Royal Knight's unyielding attitude. Even Lothar was strongly against it, so there was no room for discussion. If the commander of the alliance resigned because of such a ridiculous matter, then Rotterdam would be the real sinner. Baron was almost the smallest noble. Below them was the knight, who was more symbolic than substantive. Knights were considered quasi-nobles, higher than commoners, but lower than nobles. So, for this day, Duque made almost all the nobles nobles. Originally, he had pushed this guy out to test the waters. In the end, of course, this matter was left unsettled. However, in the upcoming war, there would definitely be some friction between Rotterdam and Storm Royal. In fact, all the other kingdoms had begun to be wary of Rotterdam. When the news was sent to Duque through magic, Duque was at the edge of the cliff of grim battle and stopped at the entrance of the cave. It was not because the cave could not lead to the Red Dragon Queen, but because the power of the wind told him that there were more than 3 young red dragons resting in the middle of the road. Unless the dragons were in hibernation, ordinary humans would not be able to hide from their senses. Stealth was useless. Since he couldn't enter, he could only stay where he was. When the message arrived, the system notified Duque almost immediately. Warning! Warning! Magic communication encryption level lowered. Suspect communication is being eavesdropped. Duque's pupils suddenly shrank. His worst fears had come true, a magic transmission leak. Needless to say, it must be the doing of the Black Dragon King hiding in the dark. At the end of the day, magic communication was still a type of magic. In this world, the true ancestors of magic were the dragons. The Blue Dragon King, Malygos, was responsible for guarding the secrets of magic, but that was only for outsiders. In fact, all true dragons were good at magic. Needless to say, Nisario, who was originally one of the 5 dragon aspects. This was the most important reason why Duque refused to communicate with them at all times. Wings of Death didn't isolate Duque's external communications. He was only eavesdropping. Duque could still receive the complete message. However, this message still made Duque tremble. Lord Darren appointed Mograine as the deputy commander of the Alliance and sought Alterac. They tried to send a noble to marry Miss Barov with a dowry of 1,000 gold coins, but they have been stopped by us and Commander Lothar. Duque's body suddenly trembled a little. Was it excitement, anger, or sadness? His heart thumping violently, Duque wanted to take a deep breath so that Nisario wouldn't notice his intense emotions, but he couldn't suppress it. Lord Darren, like in history, had made a move on Alterac. Perhaps because the tribes in this life were more aggressive, Lord Darren suffered more losses than in history. So, under the impulse of rapid expansion, Tarinas made a move earlier than in history. In history, the biggest symbol of the change from Lord Darren Alliance to Alliance was the destruction of Lord Darren. When Arthas came to the center and directly killed his father and destroyed Lord Darren, the surrounding countries had the chance to save the other cities of Lord Darren, but they all chose to watch from the sidelines, which gave Arthas the opportunity to destroy them one by one. But could it be that the kings of Kuel Salis, Gilnis, Dalagen, and Stormguard were all blind? But that's not it. That was because all the surrounding countries were King screwed over by Tarinas. In the original history, after winning the second battle of the Dark Portal, the Alliance captured more than 100,000 orcs. The orcs were clearly invaders, slaughtering countless humans and burning countless cities. After winning the war, Tarinas actually made a seemingly brainless suggestion. A real knight will not slaughter captives. So we can just imprison the orcs. Was Tarinas really brainless? On the contrary, he was extremely shrewd. Shrewd to the point of being ruthless. On one hand, the mainstream values of chivalry at that time did not allow for this. On the other hand, Tarinas' dream of Lord Darren becoming the new capital of the human empire through the Battle of the Dark Portal was shattered. No country was willing to follow Lord Darren, since everyone had to bear the losses and destruction brought about by the war. If I am not living well, then don't even think about living well. Apart from the Stormwind Kingdom, which had 1,000 things to do, almost every human kingdom was forced to imprison orcs. The famous Durnhold Castle, Lord Darren Mill Shelter, and Hammerfall Town were all orc prisons that Lord Darren, as the leader of the Alliance, forced the various countries to build. The economies of the various countries were already on the brink of collapse because of the war, and they were forced to carry this huge burden by Tarinas, who pretended to be a saint. It would be strange if they were angry. The truth was, after hearing that Lord Darren had fallen, the leaders of the various countries clapped their hands in joy. In the end, they all ignored the fact that the Scourge army was made up of immortals, and were overwhelmed by the immortals who had the absolute advantage in numbers. So, when Duque heard that the old bastard Tarinas had finally made his move, Duque still felt a sense of anger. Is this the result I wanted? In order to preserve the vitality of the Alliance, I lived every day seriously after I transmigrated. Even after obtaining millions of dollars, I did not waste a single day. I spent all my time improving myself and the strength of the entire Alliance. I did not skimp on every major event. Every day, I repeatedly thought about how I could change the course of history. Because I thought that even if I could not win every battle beautifully, at least I could bring more hope to the Alliance. But how the hell did you treat me? You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.